Hello everyone. Tonight, the flicker of a fire sets the stage for a journey back to ancient Egypt. Imagine a world where time moved slowly, where the rhythm of daily tasks, not grand monuments, defined life. In this calm exploration, we'll uncover the surprising truth about why the ancient Egyptians devoted more time to baking bread than building pyramids. Before we dive in, if you find serenity in these quiet moments, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Your support means the world and helps us continue bringing you stories like these. Also, feel free to drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far this journey reaches. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin our journey into the heart of ancient Egypt, where bread, not monuments, was the real foundation of life. As the first rays of sunlight creep over the horizon, the land of Egypt stirs, not with the rush of the city, but with the steady rhythm of a daily routine, slow, deliberate, and unchanging. It's a rhythm that flows through every life, every hand that works, every breath taken. Each morning, as the earth slowly wakes, the villagers rise, their movements quiet, their actions set in the comforting pattern of daily survival. Every morning, the same motions, the grinding of grain, the kneading of dough, the steady shaping of loaves. It is not the grand ambitions of building pyramids that dominate their day, but the humble art of bread making, the pulse of the land that feeds them. In the coolness of the early hours, as the scent of fresh flour fills the air, there is a sense of calm in this simplicity. The grains are ground, each stone against stone, with an almost meditative slowness. The repetitive sound, soft and steady, is like a heartbeat. The hands of the women move in practiced patterns, shaping the dough, pressing it, folding it and pressing again. Every movement a ritual passed down through generations. This is life in ancient Egypt, where time flows with the same steady rhythm, day after day, hour after hour. The importance of bread cannot be overstated. It is not just food, it is the very foundation of life. Bread nourishes, sustains, and connects the people to the land and to one another. It is a symbol of survival, of continuity, and of the quiet dignity found in the simplicity of daily labor. And so, as the sun rises higher and the village stirs to life, the bread-making continues, its pace unhurried, its presence constant. The rituals of the day, just like the bread itself, are humble, yet they are the very backbone of Egyptian culture. In the same way the Nile flows steadily, its water a lifeline, so does the rhythm of daily life in Egypt persist. The grinding, the kneading, the shaping, hour by hour, each action part of the larger cycle of survival. It is a life of repetition, but it is a repetition filled with meaning, a repetition that provides comfort, security, and sustenance. And in this rhythm there is peace, a quiet, unwavering peace, the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt, where each moment is just like the last, unhurried, consistent, and eternal. As the sun begins to climb higher in the sky, the ritual of bread-making unfolds once again, a process as familiar as the rising of the dawn. Each day, the same steps are taken, each action a part of a larger, timeless tradition. The grains are gathered, ground, and transformed into something more, a loaf that will nourish and sustain. And so, the cycle begins anew. Every morning, the same grains are measured, their textures smooth, their colors golden. The wheat, carefully selected, is the lifeblood of this ancient tradition. In every grain there is the promise of sustenance, the foundation of daily life. The grinding stone hums its steady rhythm as the wheat is transformed into flour, soft and powdery, fine enough to pass through the fingers like sand. And yet, in this simple transformation, a miracle takes place. Grain becomes bread, sustenance for the body and comfort for the soul. The process is deliberate, measured, and unhurried. As the flour piles up, it is sifted, each grain passing through the fine mesh like a quiet stream, separating the fine from the coarse. The workers, with their practiced hands, work slowly, almost meditatively, each motion fluid and familiar. It's a ritual, this separation, this sifting, a quiet but essential step in the making of the bread. And then the dough. Flour is mixed with water, creating a soft, pliable mass. The hands press, fold, press again, each movement a dance, a familiar rhythm that has been passed down through generations. There is no rush, no hurry, only the slow, steady rhythm of labour. The dough is kneaded until it is smooth and elastic, a perfect consistency. Every fold, every turn feels like the repetition of a quiet mantra. But it is not just the bread that holds significance in this tradition, it is the process itself. The bread becomes more than food, it becomes a symbol of life. In the act of making bread, there is a connection to the land, to the cycle of the seasons, to the eternal rhythms of nature. The bread, like the people, is shaped by the earth, ground in stone, kneaded by hand, baked by fire. Once the dough is ready, it is shaped into loaves, each one a small testament to the skill of the baker. The loaves are formed carefully, their shapes almost ritualistic in their simplicity. There is a quiet elegance in the way the dough is shaped, the way it rises under the careful touch of the hands. And then, into the oven they go, each loaf, like the others, destined to become something more than it was. The heat of the fire wraps around the dough, and soon the scent of freshly baked bread fills the air, warm and comforting, drawing people near. It is not just the bread that sustains the people, it is the ritual of making it, the steady rhythm of each step that nourishes the spirit. The bread is more than just food, it is a constant, a presence that anchors the day, a reminder of the rhythm of life. And so, the bread bakes. The process, the repetition, the slow, deliberate movements, they are all part of the tradition, a tradition that has lasted for thousands of years. Every loaf, every slice is a connection to the past, a piece of the unbroken chain of history that stretches back to the very beginning. Each loaf is the same, yet each loaf is unique, a small variation in shape, a slight difference in texture. But all are the same in their essence, simple, humble, and sustaining. The bread may change in its form, but its purpose remains constant. It is the heartbeat of daily life, a reminder that in simplicity there is power, in repetition there is meaning, and so, as the loaves bake in the oven, the day continues its slow, unhurried pace. There is no rush, no urgency, only the comforting rhythm of the bread-baking tradition. And, as always, the bread will be there, waiting, ready to nourish those who have worked the land, ground the wheat, and shaped the dough. It is a cycle that will never end. It is the rhythm of life, steady and constant, like the rise of the sun and the fall of the night. As the sun climbs higher into the sky, its warm rays stretch across the vast fields of ancient Egypt, a land that is both harsh and fertile. The earth, warmed by the sun and nourished by the Nile, holds the promise of life, life sustained through the simple yet vital practices of agriculture. Every year, as the floodwaters of the Nile recede, the fields are renewed, the soil enriched by the silt that is left behind. The rhythm of the river's rise and fall is predictable, reliable, a constant in the lives of the people. And so, the cycle of planting begins, as it always has, a slow, steady ritual, repeated year after year, generation after generation. The farmers rise early, their movements unhurried, as they walk the fertile lands, ready to sow the seeds of survival. Every morning the same routine, the gathering of tools, the preparation of the soil, the planting of seeds. It is a work that requires patience, for the seeds will not grow overnight. Yet the farmers are unbothered by the slow passage of time. They know that the reward will come, as it always does, in due time. Wheat is the most prized of the crops, the grain that sustains not only the body but also the soul. Each seed is carefully placed in the rich, dark soil, where it will begin its journey toward becoming the staple that will nourish an entire society. The act of planting is ritualistic, almost sacred, as the farmers press each seed into the earth with the same care and precision that they use when grinding the flour for bread. The seeds of wheat are not merely seeds, they are a promise, a guarantee of survival. Without them, there is no bread. Without bread, there is no life. But wheat is not the only crop that the farmers tend to. There are barley, flax, and vegetables, each grown with equal care, each serving its purpose in the great web of survival. The fields are carefully managed, the irrigation channels checked and repaired, ensuring that the life-giving water of the Nile reaches every corner of the land. It is a slow, steady process, as natural as the rise and fall of the river itself. Every afternoon the farmers return to their fields, the rhythm of their work unchanged. The earth is tilled, the plants are watered, and the growth is monitored with quiet diligence. It is a life of repetition, yet it is a life full of purpose. The land, like the bread, is the very foundation of existence. Every plant, every seed, every grain is a part of the unbroken chain of survival, a chain that stretches back to the earliest days of civilization. And then, as the day fades into evening, the farmers leave the fields, their work done for the day. The land is left to rest, as it always does, until the next cycle begins. The planting is done, but the work is far from over. There will be weeding, harvesting, and threshing, each step as necessary as the one before it. But for now, the land is still, awaiting the next day's labour. And so, life in ancient Egypt flows with the seasons, each day a repetition of the one before, but always filled with the quiet knowledge that the land will provide. The river, the earth, and the crops, they are all connected, part of a greater system that sustains life. The wheat grows slowly, its stalks rising from the earth with the steady rhythm of time, and in that growth there is hope. Hope that, in time, the harvest will come and the bread will be made. In the same way, the cycle continues, slow, predictable, reliable. The earth is worked, the crops grow, and the people are sustained. The bread is made, the harvest is gathered, and life in ancient Egypt moves forward, one grain at a time. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields and villages of ancient Egypt, the steady rhythm of daily life continues. The work of the day has been done, the bread has been baked, the fields tilled, and yet there is one more aspect of life that we must consider. For in this land, where the river's floodwaters bring abundance, and the grain is harvested in quiet, repetitive rhythms, bread has come to symbolize more than just sustenance. It is currency. Yes, bread, the humble loaf, golden and warm, functions as a form of payment, as essential to the economy as the grain from which it is made. And, much like the bread itself, this idea is simple yet profound, woven into the fabric of daily life in a way that feels almost natural. Every morning, as workers leave their homes, they carry with them the promise of bread. Bread in this land is not just food, it is value. It is the medium through which goods and services flow. A baker may trade a loaf for a jug of olive oil, a farmer might offer bread in exchange for tools, and a labourer may earn his daily bread in the form of a loaf, the very bread that he will eat, that will sustain him. The exchange is always the same. One loaf for one service, one loaf for one task. The bread, carefully made, is the currency that binds the people together, the simple unit of value that is shared by all. And as simple as it seems, there is an irony to it, how such a humble thing can become the very foundation of trade, the lifeblood of the economy. And yet, the exchange is done quietly, without fanfare. There are no great banks or ledgers, no complex contracts. There is only the steady exchange of bread, passed from hand to hand, loaf to loaf, in the same rhythm that marks every day. It is a ritual, this exchange, this transaction, a ritual that repeats itself every morning, every afternoon, every evening. And in this repetition, there is security. The value of bread is not just in its physical form, but in its constancy. In every loaf, there is the assurance of sustenance, the guarantee that the day's work has been rewarded, that the labourer will return home with what he needs. The labour is steady, unhurried, and so too is the exchange of bread. There's no hurry to it, no rush, only the quiet knowledge that at the end of the day, the bread will be there. Even as the bread is traded, its significance deepens. The rich man may offer a sack of grain in exchange for the finest loaves, while the poorest may barter their labor in exchange for just a single piece. Yet, all transactions are equal. Each loaf holds the same value, whether it is exchanged for a rich man's silver or a laborer's time. And so, bread becomes not only sustenance but a form of equality, a common thread that binds the society together. And so, as the night falls, the village rests, the bread of the day's exchange now part of the fabric of daily life, waiting to be consumed, waiting to be shared. The economy hums quietly in the background, its movement as steady and predictable as the rhythms of bread-making itself. The cycle continues, bread flowing from hand to hand, from baker to labourer, from farmer to merchant, as it always has. Tomorrow, the cycle will repeat. More bread will be baked, more transactions will be made. The exchange will continue, one loaf at a time, one transaction at a time. And, in the quiet, unhurried way that it always has, bread will continue to serve as currency in this land, a symbol of survival, of value, and of connection. In this simple ritual, there is profound meaning, how bread, in all its humble glory, becomes the very heartbeat of an economy. The same bread that nourishes the body also nourishes the community, sustaining not just the individual, but the society as a whole. It is a rhythm, a constant, a reminder that in simplicity there is strength. As the day unfolds and the sun reaches its zenith, the steady hum of life in ancient Egypt continues, each rhythm interwoven with the quiet certainty that bread, in all its forms, is a constant. The loaves, baked fresh and warm, travel from hand to hand, from home to home, across a land where bread holds more than just nutritional value. It holds power, it holds place, and it holds order. In the early hours of the morning, as the streets begin to fill with the steady pace of workers and traders, the bread is distributed in a pattern that mirrors the social structure of the land. At the very top, the nobility and priests receive their share. Loaves made from the finest wheat, their crusts golden, their texture soft and delicate. These are the loaves fit for those who hold the power, the bread that signifies their elevated position in society. The bread, smooth and perfect, reflects the privileges they enjoy, the labour of others woven into each bite. Meanwhile, the commoners, labourers, farmers and traders receive their bread in smaller, simpler forms. The loaves, though still nourishing, are coarser, their texture denser, made from a mixture of grains that are not as refined. It is the bread of those who work with their hands, whose lives are spent tilling the earth or crafting goods. And yet, there is something almost comforting in the simplicity of it, the humble loaf that sustains not just the body, but the very spirit of the working class. It is a bread that binds them together, a bread that reminds them of the steady rhythm of their labour, of the cycle that defines their days. But there is an irony in this distribution. For while bread is the lifeblood of the land, it also serves as a tool for reinforcing the very social order that divides the people. The loaves given to the elite are prized and protected, and the loaves given to the commoners, though plentiful, are always just a little bit less. Bread, in this way, becomes a symbol not only of nourishment, but of status. It is the great equalizer and the great divider, a simple piece of sustenance carrying with it the weight of the social hierarchy. And yet, in this division, there is no protest, no upheaval. The exchange of bread is as ritualistic as the daily labour itself, unhurried, unremarkable, and unquestioned. The distribution follows the same pattern each day, with the loaves moving along the same paths, the bread reaching those who need it most, and those who need it least. The rhythm of life continues as it always has, slow and steady, with each loaf finding its place in the world. The workers, who rise early to knead the dough and bake the bread, are often the same ones who will receive their loaves later in the day, the labour of their hands returning to them in the form of sustenance. And yet, even as they receive their share, they know that their bread will never be the same as the bread given to the elite. But they are not resentful. No, for there is something comforting in the predictability of it. Each loaf, each transaction, is as it should be. The bread, though uneven in quality, is steady in its consistency. It is the cycle, the ritual that gives life meaning. And as the sun begins to set and the day draws to a close, the bread distribution ceases and the streets quiet. The loaves are gone, the day's work complete. The rhythm of the bread, the flow of sustenance, has shaped another day, reinforcing the divisions that mark the land. But there is a peace in this repetition, a tranquility in the knowledge that tomorrow the bread will be there again, waiting. The same loaves, the same exchange, the same divisions. It is the rhythm of Egypt, unchanging and eternal. The bread may differ in shape, in quality, but it remains, as always, a constant reminder of the social order, of the roles we play, the work we do, and the place we hold in the world. And so the cycle continues, slow, steady, and reassuringly predictable. The bread flows from baker to merchant to commoner, from commoner to elite. It is a simple process, and yet it sustains the very foundation of society itself, the unspoken truth that binds the people of Egypt together, one loaf at a time. As the day lingers in the warmth of midday, the workers behind the bread are at their stations, each movement as methodical and repetitive as the cycles of the river itself. These craftsmen, these labourers, are the quiet heartbeat of Egypt's bread-making tradition. They rise before the sun, just as the earth is still cool, their hands already familiar with the tasks ahead of them. Every morning they begin the same way, gathering the tools of their trade, the large grinding stones, the wooden kneading boards, the baskets for the dough. Each piece, like the grains they work with, is a small part of a much larger process. With every motion, every gesture, they contribute to the rhythm of daily life. The labour, like the bread itself, is simple in its actions but profound in its effect. Their hands move with a steady, practiced ease, pressing, folding, shaping, always in the same predictable pattern. The workers who grind the wheat, their arms moving in circular, repetitive motions, are the first to start the day. With every turn of the stone, the grain is slowly transformed into flour. The sound of the grinding stone is soft, rhythmic, and almost hypnotic, a steady hum that fills the quiet air. It is a labour of patience, a task that requires hours of quiet effort. There is no rush, no hurry, only the slow, steady grind that will eventually bring the bread to life. The rhythm of their work mirrors the steady flow of the river, the water, the grain, the flour, always in motion but always slow and deliberate. And then there are the kneaders, the hands that press, fold, and shape the dough. With each fold, the dough becomes smoother, more elastic, more pliable. There is something meditative in the act of kneading, something grounding in the feeling of the dough beneath the fingertips. The kneader's hands move with precision, folding the dough again and again, a repetitive motion that brings the bread closer to its final form. It is a work that demands patience, but it is a work that also brings satisfaction, the knowledge that each movement brings the dough one step closer to becoming something nourishing, something essential. As the dough is kneaded, it is shaped into loaves, each one a small creation, a quiet testament to the worker's skill. The loaves are formed with care, the edges smooth and uniform. The workers know the bread will be judged by its form, its texture, its consistency. They take pride in the work, even though they know their hands are not the ones that will receive the praise. The bread is for others, for those who will eat it, who will trade it, who will live by it. Once the bread is shaped, it is placed in the ovens, where the heat will work its magic, turning the dough into something golden, something warm. The bakers, with their practiced eyes, watch the ovens carefully. They know just how long the bread needs, just when the loaves are ready to come out. The timing is everything, and their attention to detail is unwavering. The bread must be perfect, for it is more than just food. It is the foundation of daily life, the product of their labour. And yet, there is an irony in all of this. These workers, who dedicate their hours to creating the bread that sustains the people, often go unnoticed, their labour taken for granted. They toil in the background, their work steady and constant, but their names are seldom remembered. It is the bread that is celebrated, not the hands that made it, and yet, without them, without the labour of these craftsmen, the bread would not exist. The labourers are the unsung heroes of Egypt's daily life, their contributions essential, but their recognition rare. And so, as the sun begins to dip beneath the horizon, the day's work comes to a close. The loaves, now golden and ready, are gathered and distributed. The workers, tired but content, return to their homes. They have done their part, shaping the rhythm of the day, contributing to the steady flow of life in Egypt. Tomorrow they will rise again, ready to repeat the same process. The grinding, the kneading, the shaping, it will all begin anew. There is comfort in this repetition, a peace in the knowledge that their work, though quiet and uncelebrated, is essential to the survival of the land. The bread they make, the labour they offer, is what holds the fabric of society together. And in this simple act, there is something profound, something that connects them to the land, to the bread, and to the generations that have come before them. So the bread will continue to be made, the labour will continue, steady and unhurried. The workers will rise once more, ready to grind, knead and shape the bread that will sustain Egypt. It is a rhythm that will never stop, a rhythm that echoes through time from one generation to the next. As the sun begins its descent, casting long, gentle shadows over the land, the rhythms of daily life in ancient Egypt settle into the quiet of evening. But even in the stillness, there remains an underlying hum, a reminder that bread, humble and nourishing, holds a place not just in the hands of workers and families, but in the sacred spaces of the temples too. Here, bread takes on a new role, one that transcends its simple purpose of sustenance. In the temples, it becomes an offering, a gift to the gods, woven into the rituals that connect the people to the divine. Every morning, just as the workers rise to begin their labour, the priest rise as well. Their movements are calm, deliberate, and unhurried. They prepare the bread, loaves that will be placed upon the altars, loaves that will be offered in the quiet, reverent ceremonies that mark the rhythms of the sacred day. The bread is not merely baked, it is prepared with intention, with care. Each loaf is imbued with a sense of reverence, as if it is more than just flour and water. It is a symbol of connection, of devotion, of faith. The bread that will be offered to the gods is often made from the finest grains ground to perfection, its texture soft, almost sacred in its simplicity. The loaves are carefully shaped, each one pressed and moulded with reverence. And as the priests prepare the bread, they perform their own rituals, their hands moving in steady, practiced motions. There is no rush in their work, only the steady, repetitive actions that have been passed down through generations. The priests, like the labourers, know the importance of ritual, and in their hands the bread becomes more than just food. It becomes an offering, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Once the bread is prepared, it is carried in procession to the temples where it will be placed upon the altars. The incense fills the air, thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, and the priests chant their prayers, their voices rising in a steady, soothing cadence. The bread, now resting on the altar, becomes a symbol of the people's devotion, an offering to the gods that is meant to ensure favour, protection, and abundance. And yet, there is an irony to this sacred bread. For while it is offered in reverence, it is in essence the same bread that nourishes the people in their daily lives. The same loaves that feed the labourers are now placed before the gods. It is as if the very cycle of life, bread from earth to earth, has come full circle, a quiet reminder that even in the sacred, the mundane has its place. The bread that sustains the body also sustains the spirit, and in this simple act, there is a deep, almost comforting connection between the people and the divine. The rituals of offering bread are not just about food, they are about gratitude. Gratitude for the land, for the harvest, for the sustenance that the gods provide. The priests do not merely offer the bread, they give thanks, they honour the gods, and in doing so they reaffirm the rhythms of life that connect them to the earth and to each other. The bread becomes a vessel for their prayers, a way to ask for guidance, for blessings, for the continued flow of life. And so, as the evening settles into a peaceful calm, the bread remains upon the altar, its form humble but its significance profound. The ritual has been performed, the offering made, and the connection between the people and the divine has been reaffirmed. The bread, having passed through the hands of the workers and the priests, will soon return to the people, its role complete. It will be consumed, it will nourish, it will sustain. But for now, it rests in silence, its presence a quiet reminder of the sacredness of daily life. The bread, in all its simplicity, holds within it the power of ritual, the power of connection, and the power of gratitude. And as the stars begin to appear in the night sky, the cycle of life continues, steady and unhurried. Tomorrow there will be more bread to bake, more offerings to make, more rituals to repeat. The bread will be made, the bread will be offered, and the bread will continue to sustain in the earthly and the divine. In this simple act of offering there is peace, there is continuity, there is a reminder that the mundane and the sacred are not separate. They are one, intertwined in the same quiet, repetitive rhythm. The bread, like the sun, will rise again. As the day stretches into the late afternoon, the land of Egypt, bathed in the soft golden light, whispers of a story older than time itself, a story that is as constant as the flow of the Nile River, winding its way through the heart of the land. The river, with its gentle current and life-giving waters, has shaped this civilization since the dawn of time. It is not just a body of water, it is the lifeblood of Egypt, the force that makes bread and life possible. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile rises and falls, its waters sweeping over the land, leaving behind a rich blanket of silt that nourishes the soil. It is a rhythm that the people of Egypt have come to trust, a steady, unchanging pattern that brings both predictability and abundance. The rise of the Nile is not just a seasonal event, it is a celebration, a reminder that life will continue, that the earth will be renewed, and that the bread, the very essence of survival, will be made once again. The farmers, who know the land as intimately as they know their own hands, prepare for the annual flood. Every year, they wait for the river to rise, and when it does, they move quickly, as if in anticipation of the gift that is about to be given. The flood waters spread across the land, and as they recede, they leave behind a rich, fertile soil, a soil that is ready to receive the seeds that will one day become the grain for bread. The grain, wheat, barley, grows with the rhythm of the Nile. The water, life-giving and nourishing, seeps into the earth, reaching deep into the roots of the plants. The roots stretch and grow, pulling nutrients from the earth, while above, the stalks rise slowly, steadily, as the sun warms the land. It is a process as predictable as the rivers flow, and as reliable as the workers who tend to the fields. Every afternoon, as the sun beats down on the earth, the farmers can be seen moving across the fields, their hands steady as they water the crops, guiding them through their growth. The rhythm of their work is slow and steady, like the flow of the river itself. They do not hurry, they do not rush. They know that the land, just like the bread, must be treated with care. The water, the earth, and the grain all work together in quiet harmony, creating the foundation for the bread that will sustain Egypt. And yet, there is an irony in this, how something as simple as water, something that flows freely, can have such a profound impact on the creation of bread. The water, so essential to life, is not just a resource. It is a partner in the process, a force that shapes the land, that nourishes the crops, that transforms the grains into sustenance. Without it, there is no bread. Without the Nile, there would be no Egypt. The Nile, like the bread, is central to life. It is the source of all things, of life, of food, of survival. The water shapes the land, and in turn, the land shapes the bread. And yet, there is something quietly profound in this connection. How something as elemental as water can be the foundation for such a complex, intricate process. The water, like the bread, is simple and essential, yet it is also extraordinary in its ability to sustain life. As the evening settles in and the last light of the day fades, the water continues its steady flow, undisturbed, eternal. The farmers, their work done for the day, return to their homes knowing that the river will rise again, that the land will be fertile, that the bread will be made. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin once more. The river will rise, the crops will grow, and the bread will be made, as it always has been. The connection between the Nile and the bread is unbroken, a thread that runs through time linking the past to the present. The river, with its steady flow, is the constant that makes all things possible. And so, as the night falls, the land sleeps, the water continues to flow, and the promise of bread remains, steady and unchanging, like the Nile itself. In this simplicity, in this unhurried rhythm, there is peace. The river, the water, the grain, the bread, they are all connected, each one relying on the other in a dance as old as time. And in this dance life continues, slow and steady like the flow of the Nile. As the first light of dawn breaks over the horizon, the land of Egypt stirs, but not with the rush of busy activity. No, it is a quiet awakening, a steady transition from the stillness of the night to the soft hum of another day. The workers rise early, just as the cool morning air begins to touch the earth, and with each rise of the sun, they begin their day. The rhythm of their lives is one of repetition, yet within that repetition lies a calm, a steady flow that shapes their world. Every morning, like clockwork, the baker is the first to begin his work. The bread-making ritual begins with the same quiet steps, the same routine. The flour is sifted, the water drawn, the dough kneaded. It is a process that has been passed down for generations, slow and steady without haste. The workers move through their tasks with a sense of familiarity, their hands knowing exactly what to do. There is no rush, no pressure to move faster. Instead, there is a peacefulness in the simplicity of the work. The baker's hands press and fold the dough with the same rhythmic motion over and over. There is something meditative in the act, something grounding about the feeling of the dough beneath their fingertips. The dough is shaped slowly with care, each loaf taking form in the same steady rhythm. It is a labour of love, a labour of patience where every movement is a part of the larger pattern of life. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, the scent of freshly baked bread begins to fill the air. The loaves are placed in the oven, their golden crusts beginning to form, the warmth of the fire enveloping them. Each loaf bakes in its own time, just as each day unfolds at its own pace. There is no hurry here, only the quiet, unhurried passage of time. By mid-morning, the bread is ready. The workers gather their loaves, each one shaped with care, each one ready to be consumed or traded. The bread, simple and humble, serves as the foundation of their day. It is nourishment, but it is also the symbol of their labour, the product of their quiet, steady work. And as they go about their day, carrying their loaves with them, they are reminded that the bread is always there, a constant in their world. As the afternoon rolls on, the rhythm continues. The bread-making tasks are repeated, the kneading, the shaping, the baking. The workers' hands move with the same precision, the same familiarity. There is a quiet satisfaction in this repetition. It is not monotonous, but rather a soothing rhythm, like the ebb and flow of the river itself. Every task completed, every loaf baked, adds to the fabric of the day, the quiet progression of time. By evening, as the sun begins to set and the work for the day winds down, the bread is ready to be shared. The workers, tired but content, sit down to their simple meal, the bread serving as the centerpiece. It is the sustenance they need to continue, the food that will carry them through the night and into the next day. The bread is not just food, it is a connection, a reminder of the work they have done, the labour they have put into the earth, and the steady rhythm of life that continues day after day. And so, as the night falls and the workers retire to their homes, the cycle is complete. The bread has been made, the work has been done, and the rhythm of the day has come full circle. Tomorrow they will rise again, just as the sun rises, to begin the same process once more. The bread will be made, the hands will knead, and the rhythm of life will continue. It is a life of repetition, yes, but there is peace in this repetition. There is comfort in the knowledge that the bread will always be there, that the work will always be there, that the rhythm of life will never cease. The days may blur into one another, but each one holds its own quiet purpose, its own steady, unhurried pattern. And as the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, the workers sleep, knowing that when the sun rises once again, they will rise with it. The cycle will begin anew, the bread will be made, and the quiet rhythm of their lives will continue, as it always has, from dawn to dusk and beyond. As the sun rises over the ancient land of Egypt, casting its warm glow over the quiet villages and bustling marketplaces, another day begins. The daily rhythm of bread-making, farming, and simple survival continues, as it always has, steady and unhurried. Yet, somewhere in the distance, rising from the earth like a monumental testament to human ambition, the pyramids stand tall, their silhouette etched against the sky. But what if we could step back in time and view these wonders not as a symbol of daily life, but as an extraordinary exception to it? The pyramids, grand as they are, were not built overnight. Contrary to the dramatic tales that swirl around their construction, the process was slow, deliberate, and intertwined with the mundane rhythms of everyday life. For every stone laid on the pyramids, there were countless hours spent in the fields, grinding wheat, kneading dough, and tending to crops. The monumental effort of building these colossal structures did not disrupt the flow of daily survival. It became part of it, a massive yet steady undertaking that unfolded over generations. The real timeline of pyramid construction is not one of frantic, rushed work. No, it is a story of patience, of thousands of hands, labourers, architects and craftsmen, working slowly day by day as the bread was baked, the crops were harvested, and the sun rose and set on the land. Each stone, each brick was placed not in a frenzy, but as part of a ritual, slow, repetitive and methodical. The workers, just like those who kneaded the dough for bread, performed their tasks in familiar, rhythmic movements. Stones were carved, transported and set into place one by one, much like the steady hands that prepared the bread. It was not the high drama of ancient legends that defined the pyramid's construction, but the quiet consistency of the labourers' efforts. They did not work in isolation. They worked within the familiar pattern of daily life, each task contributing to the greater whole. And yet, it's easy to imagine how the grandeur of the pyramids can overshadow these simple daily tasks. The sheer scale of the effort to build these structures might lead us to think that it was a monumental break from daily survival. But the truth is that, while these structures required enormous effort, the rhythm of everyday life did not stop. The bread was still baked, the fields were still tended, the water from the Nile still flowed, and the grains still grew. Life went on, slowly, steadily, as it always had. As each layer of stone was added to the pyramid, it wasn't just the workers who made it happen. It was the whole system, the farms, the workers, the craftsmen, the bakers, all the elements that kept life moving. Every loaf of bread baked for the workers, every meal prepared, was part of a much larger picture, a picture that included the pyramids, yes, but also the steady, unbroken cycle of daily survival. In a sense, the pyramids themselves were built in the same way that bread was made, slowly, methodically, with careful attention to each step. The pyramid's construction was just another task to be integrated into the pattern of daily life. The workers did not live in isolation from the land they cultivated or the bread they baked. They were part of the same cycle, each brick laid in the pyramid an extension of the same steady rhythm that sustained the people. And so, as the sun begins to set over the pyramids, casting long shadows across the land, we are reminded that these towering structures were not an interruption to daily life. They were a part of it. They were built in the same spirit of patience, of repetition, of quiet labour that defined the daily tasks of grinding wheat, kneading dough, and tending crops. The pyramids, like the bread, stand as symbols of the enduring rhythm of life, of the quiet, unbroken efforts that create something lasting. Tomorrow, the same routine will continue. The bread will be baked, the fields will be worked, and the pyramids, slowly but surely, will rise ever higher. Each stone laid will be another step in the slow, steady rhythm of creation. And in this rhythm, there is peace, there is continuity, there is the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, in the midst of it all, life continues, just as it always has. As the sun rises once again over the vast expanse of the Egyptian desert, it casts its golden light upon two very different worlds. On one side, the towering pyramids rise slowly, their stone faces reflecting the warmth of the morning sun, a testament to the incredible labour of thousands. On the other, the daily rhythms of the village unfold, steady, familiar, and equally essential to the fabric of life. It is in these quiet, repetitive tasks that we find the heartbeat of Egypt, where bread is baked, fields are worked, and lives are lived with an enduring patience. Every day, just as the workers at the pyramids begin their labour, so too do the bakers, farmers, and craftsmen who form the backbone of Egyptian society. The labourers who work on the pyramids, those whose names are often lost to time, rise early, ready to move the massive stones that will one day form the tomb of a pharaoh. Their work is grueling, demanding the strength of their bodies and the coordination of their hands. But the rhythm of their labour, though grand in scale, is not unlike the work of the bakers or the farmers. It is slow, steady, and repetitive. Every stone placed in the pyramid is a small but vital piece of a larger whole, just as every loaf of bread is a small but vital piece of the daily sustenance that keeps the land alive. The builders, with their strong hands, labour under the hot sun, lifting stones that will never be seen by their families, building structures that will outlast their own lifetimes. They work alongside one another in a steady rhythm that mirrors the land they serve. There is no rush. There is only the slow, methodical pace of construction, just as there is no rush in the quiet hours of the bakery, where dough is kneaded and loaves are shaped. In both places, the workers give their all, not for immediate recognition, but for the steady, unbroken cycle of life. And yet, for all the grandeur of the pyramids, it is the bakers who provide the true sustenance. Every morning they rise early, gathering the flour, the water, the yeast. They knead the dough, shaping it with their hands until it is just right. The process is repetitive, yes, but it is vital. The bread that is baked is what fuels the workers in the fields, the builders at the pyramids, and the families in the villages. Without the bread, the work of the day would not be possible, and so in a way the bakers, though unseen by the grand monuments of the land, are the unsung heroes of Egypt, their work as important as that of the great builders themselves. The pharaohs, in their grand palaces, are distant from the rhythm of daily labour. Their lives are marked by ceremonies and rituals, by wealth and power. They are revered and respected, but they do not partake in the simple tasks that sustain the land. The builders, too, are removed from the simplicity of daily life. Their labour is monumental, their task grand, but it is the bakers, the everyday workers, who live within the steady cycle of life. They work in the quiet, unseen corners of the land, performing tasks that are as simple as they are essential. The irony, perhaps, is that the grand pyramids, while magnificent in their scale and ambition, were built by the hands of men who, at the end of each day, returned to the same quiet rhythm that the bakers and farmers followed. The builders, who created the tombs for the pharaohs, were themselves sustained by the bread that came from the same land, and the rhythms of their labour were not so different from those who kneaded dough and worked the fields. As the day moves toward evening, the workers at the pyramids rest, their efforts for the day complete. The bakers, too, finish their work, the loaves fresh and ready to be shared. The rhythm of the day has been fulfilled. The workers, the builders, the bakers, they have all played their part in the ongoing cycle of life, in the ongoing rhythm that sustains Egypt. The pyramid rises slowly, a monument to human ambition, but it is the bread, humble and constant, that truly nourishes the people. Tomorrow, the work will continue. The builders will return to their stones, the bakers to their dough, and the rhythm of life will carry on, slow and steady, just as it always has. The grandeur of the pyramids may stand as a testament to human achievement, but it is the quiet labour of the everyday worker, the ones who bake the bread and till the fields, who truly keep the land alive. As the sun sets over the quiet villages of ancient Egypt, casting long, soft shadows across the land, the evening meal begins to take shape. The bread, golden and warm, is the star of the meal, as it always has been. Yet, while bread stands out as the irreplaceable staple, it is far from the only food found on the tables of the Egyptians. The rhythm of daily life includes a variety of foods, each as humble and necessary as the bread itself, and each contributing to the simple, steady diet that sustained this ancient civilization. Every day, as the bread is kneaded and baked, other food preparations are taking place. The kitchens are filled with the scent of vegetables, lentils, onions, garlic and leeks, grown in the fertile soil along the Nile. These humble ingredients form the base of many meals, their flavours simple but essential. The Egyptians, who lived in harmony with the land, knew the value of what the earth provided, and they used it in every meal, often in combinations that were as practical as they were nourishing. The beans and lentils, small but hearty, were often cooked into stews, their thick textures providing sustenance for the workers who laboured under the sun. The vegetables, often harvested from the rich soil of the Nile floodplain, were simple, yet they formed a necessary part of the diet. These meals, though not as grand as the royal feasts, were what the common people ate, slow-cooked, filling and humble, but they provided the energy needed for another day's work. And then there was the fish, caught fresh from the Nile's waters. The river, with its endless flow, provided not just water for crops, but a steady supply of fish, catfish, tilapia, and other varieties, depending on the season. The fish were salted, dried, or cooked fresh, often eaten alongside the staple bread and vegetables. There was a ritual in the preparation of fish, cutting, cleaning, salting. The process was as familiar as the bread-making itself, a quiet, repetitive act that tied the people to the land, to the river, and to the food that grew and swam around them. Fruit, too, played a part in the diet of the Egyptians. Dates, figs, and pomegranates grew in abundance, their sweetness a welcome contrast to the heartiness of bread and stew. The fruit was often eaten fresh or dried for storage, providing a burst of flavour that brought joy to the otherwise simple meals. And yet, even the fruit in its sweetness could not compete with the enduring presence of bread. The bread, despite the variety of foods on the table, always held the centre place, a constant in a world of shifting flavours. The irony of it all, perhaps, is how bread, so humble in its simplicity, managed to overshadow the variety of other foods in the Egyptian diet. The bread, baked fresh each morning, was the one thing that could always be relied upon. The lentils and fish, the fruits and vegetables, these were all important, of course, but they were seen as supplements to the bread. The bread was the foundation. It was the thing that tied the meal together, just as it tied the day together. And yet, despite its unshakable place at the table, there was a sense of balance in the diet. The Egyptians, aware of the land's abundance, ate what was available. They knew the value of variety, how the lentils would fill them, how the fish would nourish, how the fruit would refresh. But always, in every meal, the bread remained the constant, the one thing that anchored them to the land, to the river, and to the eternal rhythm of life. As the evening fades into night, the families sit together, sharing their simple meals. The bread, broken into pieces and shared among them, is the centre of it all. The fish, the vegetables, the fruit, these are enjoyed, but it is the bread that makes the meal whole. It is the bread that sustains them, that nourishes them, that carries them through another day. Tomorrow, the same rhythm will continue. The bread will be baked, the vegetables will be harvested, the fish will be caught, and the meals will be shared. The bread, in its simplicity, will continue to be the staple of the Egyptian diet, the one thing that will always remain the same in a world of variety and change. In the quiet repetition of this simple act, there is comfort, there is continuity, there is peace. As the morning light pours gently over the land, a new day begins, and with it, the familiar, comforting rhythm of bread making. It is a process that unfolds slowly, deliberately, in the same quiet way it has for generations. There is no hurry, no rush. Each step is as ritualistic as it is essential, and each movement, no matter how simple, holds purpose. From the moment the grain is harvested to the moment the bread is pulled from the oven, there is a rhythm, a steady, peaceful cycle that nourishes not just the body but the spirit. First, the grain is gathered. It has been nurtured by the Nile, by the rich, fertile soil, and by the hands of the workers who have tilled the land with patience. The wheat, golden and full of promise, is now ready for its transformation. It is brought to the mill, where the process of grinding begins. The stones, heavy and worn by years of use, move in steady, repetitive motion. The grain is poured in, and as the stone turns, the wheat begins to break down, its hard exterior softened, its insides released. The sound is gentle but persistent, a rhythmic grinding that fills the air, echoing the passage of time. As the grain is ground into flour, it passes through the millstones, each rotation bringing it closer to its final form. The flour that emerges is soft and powdery, fine enough to be sifted, fine enough to be worked into dough. The grains, once rough and sturdy, are now transformed, ready to become the very foundation of life. Bread. Next comes the mixing. The flour is combined with water, cool, clean, drawn from the Nile, the life-giving river that nourishes all. The hands begin to work slowly, with intent, as the flour and water come together. The mixture is stirred, the dough beginning to take shape. The motion is fluid, calm, almost meditative. It is a simple act, yet it requires care. Just as the earth requires care to grow its grain, the dough requires patience to come to life. Once the flour and water have come together, the kneading begins. The dough is worked and folded, pressed and stretched. The hands, now familiar with the process, move in rhythmic, repetitive motions, their movements slow and deliberate. With each fold, the dough becomes smoother, more elastic, more pliable. The kneading continues, a steady back and forth until the dough reaches the perfect consistency. Soft, yet firm, ready for the next step. This is not a hurried task. It takes time, and with each motion the bread comes closer to becoming what it is meant to be. After the kneading, the dough is set aside to rise. It is left in the warmth, where it can rest, where it can grow. As it rises, the dough slowly expands, filling with air, becoming light and airy. This is the quiet moment of anticipation, the time when the bread prepares itself for the oven. It is a simple act, yet in that moment there is a sense of magic. The dough, which began as flour and water, now begins to take on a life of its own. When the dough has risen, it is time to shape it. The baker's hands once again move with practiced ease, gently forming the dough into loaves. There is no rush, no sudden movement, just the steady shaping, the careful moulding. Each loaf is formed, its edges smoothed, its shape perfected. There is beauty in the simplicity of it all. The loaves are placed on the baking trays, ready for the oven. The oven is preheated, its heat filling the air. As the loaves are placed inside, the warmth envelops them, and the baking begins. The bread, once soft and pliable, now begins to harden, its crust forming, its shape becoming more defined. The smell of fresh bread begins to fill the air, warm, inviting, comforting. It is a smell that signals the end of the process, the final step in the bread-making journey. As the loaves bake, they rise further, their crusts turning golden brown, the heat of the oven giving them their final, perfect form. The bread becomes something more than just flour and water. It becomes sustenance, it becomes life. It is the product of hours of work, of patience, of repetition. The bread, though simple, is a reminder of the care that goes into making something nourishing, something that will sustain not just the body but the community. And then, when the bread is ready, it is removed from the oven. The loaves are golden, their crusts crisp, their insides soft and warm. They are broken, shared, eaten. The bread in all its simplicity has completed its journey, and with it, the cycle of life continues, slow, steady, and sure. Tomorrow the bread will be made again, the process beginning once more, as it always has. It is a rhythm that does not change, a cycle that endures. In the end, the bread stands as a symbol, not just of nourishment, but of life itself. From grain to loaf, from earth to oven, it is a simple journey, but one filled with meaning. And with each loaf that is baked, each step in the process, we are reminded that the quiet, steady rhythm of life, like the making of bread, carries on, unhurried, unbroken. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting its warmth across the vast Egyptian landscape, the grand pyramids stand tall, silent, enduring monuments to human ambition. Yet, beyond the towering stones and intricate designs, there is a quieter, less known side to their creation, one that unfolds in the rhythm of everyday life, much like the bread-baking process or the care of crops. The construction of the pyramids, while a monumental task, was not just about lifting giant stones into place. It was about the careful, methodical work of thousands of people, each with their own small but essential role to play in this grand project. Every morning, as the workers rise from their simple homes, their tasks are set before them, much like the daily routine of a baker preparing dough. The pyramids, as imposing and awe-inspiring as they are, did not emerge from the desert in a frenzy of chaos. No, their construction followed a slow, steady rhythm, much like the rhythms of daily survival that sustained the workers, the grinding of grain, the shaping of dough, the ploughing of fields. Each worker, whether a labourer, a craftsman, or a manager, moved through their tasks with practiced ease, much like the baker's hands shaping loaves of bread. Behind the grand scene of pyramid building, there was a complex web of logistics. The workers did not just build, they were supported by an army of others, suppliers, overseers, and transporters, who made sure the stones were quarried, carved, and transported to the site. The stones, heavy and immense, did not arrive by magic. They were brought from quarries miles away, carefully cut and shaped to fit into the pyramid's design. The transportation of these stones was an intricate process, with teams of workers using ropes, sleds, and wooden rollers to move the massive blocks. The workers who moved the stones were skilled in their craft, using the simplest tools, yet achieving extraordinary feats of strength and coordination. The Nile River, with its life-giving waters, played a crucial role in this process. Much like the grain that fed the workers, the river fed the construction efforts. The stones were transported on boats floated down the river to the base of the pyramid, and from there they were carefully moved into place. This rhythm of work, of moving stones with patience and precision, was as familiar as the cycles of planting and harvesting. The workers, though focused on the monumental task at hand, were also part of a larger, quieter rhythm of life, a rhythm that ensured the stones moved steadily and smoothly, much like the kneading of dough. The workers who placed the stones were often more than mere labourers. Many were skilled craftsmen, their expertise in shaping stone and fitting it into the pyramid's precise structure as important as the labourers who carried the blocks. These craftsmen, like bakers shaping loaves, took great pride in their work, their hands carefully fitting the stones into place with a slow, methodical precision. The irony, perhaps, is that while the pyramid was seen as a symbol of the pharaoh's grandeur, it was built with the humble tools of everyday life: ropes, sleds, and hands that had spent years grinding grain, shaping dough, and tending to the land. In the shadows of the Great Pyramid, there were also the lesser-known workers, the ones who kept the workers nourished, the ones who ensured that bread was always baked and water was always available. The provision of food, water, and shelter for the thousands of workers who laboured under the hot Egyptian sun was no small feat. Just as the bread was baked each morning, large quantities of food were prepared to sustain the workers. The grain was ground, the dough kneaded, the bread baked, each loaf part of the grand effort to keep the workers fed so they could continue their labour without pause. The rhythm of baking bread was no different from the rhythm of transporting stones or shaping the pyramid. It was all part of the same unbroken cycle. And yet, despite the grand scale of the pyramid's construction, the workers themselves were often forgotten. The focus was always on the stones, on the architecture, on the monument that would stand for eternity. But the workers, the bakers, the craftsmen, these were the unsung heroes of the pyramid's creation. Without their quiet, steady efforts, the pyramid would not have stood. It was their labour, much like the labour that went into every loaf of bread, that made the monumental task possible. The bread fed the builders, but it was the labour of building that ensured the bread would continue to be baked. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the pyramid, the work continues, slow and steady. The workers have done their part, the stones have been placed, and the rhythm of life continues. Tomorrow they will rise again, just as the sun rises, to continue their labour. The pyramid will rise slowly but surely, just as the bread will be baked again. And in this quiet, unhurried rhythm, there is peace, a peace that comes from knowing that the work, like the bread, will continue unbroken and steady until the pyramid is complete. As the early morning sun casts its first golden rays over the land, the rhythm of daily life in ancient Egypt begins anew. The steady hum of activity fills the air as men and women alike rise from their homes to begin another day of work. But within the quiet, repetitive tasks of daily survival, there is one group whose contribution is often overlooked, yet is as vital to the community as the bread itself: women. Every day, from dawn to dusk, women are at the heart of bread production. While their names may not be etched in the annals of history, their hands, though often unseen, shape the bread that nourishes the land. Like the earth itself, their labour is steady, rhythmic, and essential. They grind the grain, knead the dough, and bake the bread, each movement a small but significant part of a much larger process. It begins with the grinding of grain. The women, their arms steady and strong from years of practice, sit at the grinding stones, working with a calm, repetitive motion. The grain, once harvested and brought to the mill, is placed between the heavy stones, where it is ground into fine flour. The sound of the stone against stone is constant and soothing, a reminder of the slow, unhurried passage of time. The flour begins to pile up, soft and powdery, ready to be turned into something more. It is a quiet, meditative task, one that requires patience and care, and yet it is the foundation upon which the bread will rise. Once the grain is ground, the next step in the process is kneading the dough. The women's hands move with practiced ease, pressing and folding, folding and pressing. The dough, soft and pliable, begins to take shape under their gentle touch. The rhythm of kneading is slow and steady, almost like a dance, a repetitive motion that brings the bread closer to its final form. There is something almost hypnotic in the way the dough responds to their hands, something comforting in the feel of the dough beneath their fingers. It is as if the dough knows that it is being shaped into something essential, something that will feed not just the body, but the soul. And yet, as important as the kneading and shaping are, the true magic happens in the oven. Women once again tend to the fire, carefully placing the loaves of dough into the warm, crackling heat. They watch over the bread as it bakes, ensuring that it rises just right, the crust turning golden brown, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. It is a task that requires both care and patience. The fire must be just the right temperature, the loaves must bake for just the right amount of time. There is no room for hurry. The bread must be allowed to rise at its own pace, as must life itself. While the bread bakes, the women are not idle. They manage their homes, care for their children, and work alongside the men in the fields. They are the heart of the household, the ones who ensure that the bread is always ready, always available. They are the quiet providers, the ones whose work often goes unnoticed, yet whose contributions are felt in every loaf of bread that is consumed. And yet, there is a certain irony in all of this. While bread is seen as the foundation of life, and the men who harvest the grain or build the pyramids are often celebrated for their work, it is the women, often hidden in the background, who are the true backbone of the bread-making process. Their labour is steady, unyielding, and essential, yet they are not the ones whose names are remembered in the grand stories of Egypt. Instead, It is the bread itself, the final product of their labor, that stands as the symbol of their contribution. The irony is that while their hands are the ones that create the bread that sustains the land, it is the men who are often celebrated for their grand achievements, the builders of pyramids, the conquerors, the kings. But in reality, it is the women who ensure that the bread is always there, who make sure that the workers are fed, that the community survives. They are the unsung heroes of Egypt, their work quiet but powerful, their influence woven into the very fabric of daily life. As the day comes to a close and the last loaves of bread are placed on the table, the women rest, their work for the day complete. The bread, golden and warm, has risen under their hands, and the meal is ready to be shared. The women, though tired, are content. They know that their work, though often unnoticed, has sustained the community, has kept the land alive, and tomorrow they will rise again, just as they always have, to continue their labor. The bread will be baked, the cycle will continue, and the steady rhythm of life will carry on as it always has. In this quiet, unhurried rhythm, there is peace, there is continuity, and in the hands of the women who bake the bread, there is power, the power to shape not just dough, but the very life of Egypt itself. As the sun gently rises over the quiet Egyptian countryside, a soft warmth begins to fill the air. The land awakens slowly, much like the bread dough that rises under the careful hands of the baker. Yet, behind the simple process of bread making lies a deeper story, one of tools and techniques, of innovations that may have seemed ordinary to those who used them, but which were advanced for their time. These tools, simple in appearance yet ingenious in design, formed the backbone of Egypt's bread-making traditions, shaping the loaves that would feed a civilization. Every morning, the bread makers prepare their workspace with the same steady rhythm they follow every day. The first tool to be used is the grinding stone, or milling stone. These stones, heavy and worn by years of use, are essential for turning the grain into flour. But they are not merely slabs of stone. These tools represent an early form of engineering, crafted to make the process of grinding as efficient as possible. The stones are shaped and positioned so that they fit together perfectly, creating a slow but steady grinding action that gradually breaks down the wheat into fine flour. The precision of these stones is impressive. The grain is carefully ground, and the result is flour that is smooth and fine, ready to be turned into bread. The grinding stones, though simple in appearance, were essential to the bread-making process, and their design was refined over time. The steady, rhythmic grinding was almost hypnotic, a reminder of the slow, steady passage of time. The baker's hands worked with the stones, expertly moving the grain through the gap over and over again. Each grain, each turn of the stone brought them closer to the final product. The sound of stone against stone filled the air, a repetitive hum that echoed the pace of life itself. Once the grain is ground, the flour is sifted. This is where another innovation comes into play, the sifting basket. Made of woven reeds, this basket is designed to filter the finer flour from the coarser bits, allowing only the smoothest flour to pass through. The sifting process is repeated, the flour being gently shaken and sifted again and again. There is something calming in this repetition, a quiet ritual that ensures the purity of the flour. As the soft, powdery flour collects in the basket below, it is ready to be mixed with water, the next step in the process. The mixing and kneading of the dough are equally dependent on simple yet effective tools. The dough trough, a wooden or stone container, is wide and shallow, perfect for gathering the ingredients together. The baker's hands move through the dough with practiced ease, folding and pressing, folding and pressing. The trough is designed to allow the baker to work the dough without it spilling over, a small but effective innovation that makes the process smoother. The rhythmic motions of kneading are almost meditative, and the baker's hands know the exact amount of pressure to apply, the precise moment to stop and let the dough rise. And then there is the oven. In ancient Egypt, the oven was an innovation in itself. Often made from clay or brick, The oven was designed to retain heat, ensuring that the bread baked evenly and efficiently. The Egyptians had mastered the art of building these ovens, creating structures that could reach the right temperature for baking bread. The process was simple, yet effective. The bread was placed inside the oven, and the heat from the enclosed space caused the dough to rise further and form a golden crust. The oven became a key part of the bread-making ritual, its heat slowly working its magic on the dough. The use of fire, the key to the oven's heat, was not just a source of warmth. It was an innovation that allowed the bread to take shape, turning from soft, pliable dough into something golden and firm. The fire itself, carefully tended and controlled, was another tool in the baker's arsenal, one that transformed the humble dough into a meal that would sustain a people. These tools, simple though they may seem, were the product of innovation and craftsmanship. Each tool, from the grinding stone to the oven, was carefully designed to make the bread-making process as efficient as possible. The Egyptians, in their steady rhythm, were masters of these tools, using them with quiet expertise to create the bread that would nourish their families, their workers, and their society. And in this process, there is a quiet irony. How these simple tools, which we may overlook today, were at the forefront of innovation for their time. The grinding stone, the sifting basket, the dough trough, the oven, all were the tools of a craft that sustained a civilization. These tools were not just instruments of labor. They were the foundation upon which Egypt's bread-making tradition rested. Without them, the bread would not have been made, and without the bread, the people would not have been sustained. As the day draws to a close and the last loaves of bread are pulled from the oven, the tools are set aside, ready to be used again tomorrow. The cycle continues, slow and steady, as the bread is baked, the loaves are shared, and the simple rhythm of life unfolds. The tools, now worn but still functional, serve as a reminder of the innovations that sustained Egypt, quietly working in the background to ensure that the bread was always there, just as it always had been. As the day begins to soften into the warm glow of afternoon, the air in ancient Egypt is still, almost tranquil, as if the land itself is taking a slow, steady breath. Yet beneath the calm of the desert and the steady rhythm of daily life, there is a quiet but vital ingredient at work: salt. It is a simple substance, often overlooked, but it plays a crucial role in the sustenance of the land, in the preservation of food, and most importantly in the making of bread. Salt, though not as glamorous as the Nile or as revered as the pyramids, has its own quiet importance in the rhythms of life. It is the humble keeper of food, preserving both the grain and the bread. Without salt, the food would spoil too quickly, and the bread would not have the same depth of flavour. Every loaf of bread baked in Egypt is not only a product of flour and water, but also of salt, a reminder of the essential role this simple mineral plays in their daily lives. Every day as the bread is prepared, salt is added to the dough. It is not a large amount, just enough to enhance the flavour, to bring out the depth of the other ingredients. The salt is measured carefully, mixed into the flour and water with the same rhythmic, methodical motion as the kneading itself. It dissolves into the dough, its tiny crystals dissolving into something greater. As the dough rises, the salt is there, part of the process, ensuring that the bread has the right texture and taste. Without salt, the bread would lack the richness that gives it character, that gives it life. But salt is not just important in the making of bread. Its role in preservation cannot be understated. In a land where food needed to be preserved for long periods due to the heat and the need for sustenance during dry spells, salt became a key factor in ensuring that food lasted. Salt was used to preserve fish, meat, and vegetables, keeping them from spoiling in the harsh climate. The process was simple, yet effective. Food was either salted directly or stored in salt water, where the salt slowly drew out moisture and prevented decay. This preservation method, used with care and precision, allowed the people of Egypt to store food for leaner times, ensuring that they could survive even when the Nile's floodwaters receded and the land became parched. As the Egyptians worked the land and prepared their food, they knew that salt was the uncelebrated hero in this cycle. Without it, the bread would not last, the fish would not keep, and the grains would not be safe from the ravages of time. Salt, in its quiet way, became the protector of the food supply, ensuring that the people of Egypt had what they needed to survive. And yet, despite its importance, salt remained a humble, often overlooked part of the daily routine. It was something that was always there, quietly working in the background, ensuring that everything remained in balance. Just as the bread itself was an essential part of life, so too was salt. It wasn't something to be celebrated in grand ceremonies or exalted in songs of praise, but it was there in every meal, in every loaf of bread, in every preserved fish. It was a constant, like the rhythm of the Nile itself, essential to survival and yet so simple in its presence. The irony, of course, lies in the fact that while bread and grain were seen as symbols of life, it was salt, this humble mineral, that made it all possible. Without it, the bread would spoil too quickly, the food would be lost, and the survival of the people would be jeopardized. Salt, much like the bakers, worked quietly and steadily in the background, never asking for praise, never seeking the spotlight. It simply did its job, and without it, everything would fall apart. As the evening sun begins to set, casting a soft glow over the land, the bread, now fresh from the oven, is ready to be shared. The salt, in its quiet role, has done its part. The bread is not just a product of flour and water, but of the earth itself, nurtured by the land, shaped by the hands of the workers, and preserved by the salt. It is a simple loaf, yet within it lies the power of life, the ability to sustain, to nourish, and to connect the people to the earth. Tomorrow the cycle will begin again. The grain will be ground, the dough will be kneaded, and the bread will be baked. Salt, in its quiet way, will continue to play its part, preserving both the bread and the life of the people. And in this quiet, steady rhythm, there is peace, there is continuity, there is the simple, enduring truth that salt, though small and humble, is as essential to life as the bread itself. As the golden light of the late afternoon stretches across the Nile Valley, the air begins to cool, and the quiet rhythms of the day slow to a peaceful lull. In the homes of ancient Egypt, preparations for the evening meal are underway, a time for families to gather, share food, and reflect on the day that has passed. And at the heart of this gathering, as it always has been, is the bread. The bread, warm and inviting, serves as both the symbol and the sustenance of the meal, the centerpiece around which the entire family comes together. Every evening, just as the bread is carefully baked and placed on the table, families in Egypt sit together, breaking the bread and sharing in its simple nourishment. It is more than just food. It is a ritual, a moment where the threads of daily life are woven together in a quiet, unhurried way. The bread, broken into pieces and passed from hand to hand, is a symbol of unity. As each person takes their portion, they are reminded of their shared connection, not just to each other, but to the land, to the workers who kneaded and baked the bread, and to the earth that provided the grain. The act of sharing bread is as ritualistic as the baking itself. The women who have spent the day grinding, kneading, and baking now sit with their families, breaking the bread with the same care and patience that went into making it. The bread is passed around, everyone taking a piece, no one rushed, no one hurrying. The slow, steady rhythm of the meal mirrors the steady rhythm of the bread-making process itself. It is a time of peace, of reflection, and of togetherness. The bread, simple and humble, has the ability to connect the people, to make them feel united, even in their daily struggles. And as the bread is consumed, the rest of the meal unfolds. Stews of lentils, beans, and vegetables are served, accompanied by fish and dried fruits. But even as the meal diversifies, the bread remains the constant. It is there, with every bite, with every mouthful. The bread is dipped into the stews, torn into pieces and shared, eaten alongside the fish, and savoured with the same quiet, comforting rhythm as the conversations that flow around the table. Each meal is a simple act of nourishment, yet it holds so much more, a sense of continuity, of tradition, of connection. In the communal meals, the bread takes on a deeper significance. It is not just about sustenance, it is about sharing, about the bonds between the people. When guests arrive, bread is often the first thing offered, broken into pieces and shared as a gesture of hospitality. It is the offering that connects the host and the guest, the family and the stranger. The bread, simple in its form, becomes a symbol of generosity, of welcome. Its presence in social gatherings is a quiet statement that no matter how much or how little there is to share, the bread will always be enough to bring people together. In the quieter moments of family life, when the day's work is done and the bread has been broken, the shared meal becomes a time for conversation, for stories passed down from one generation to the next. The children listen, their eyes wide with curiosity, while the elders speak, their voices soft and measured. The bread, though still at the center of the table, is now accompanied by laughter, by the sound of voices weaving together in the slow, steady rhythm of life. It is a time for connection, not just to each other, but to the traditions that have shaped their lives. The bread serves as a reminder of the simple, enduring things that hold families together. The irony, perhaps, is how such a simple thing, the breaking of bread, can carry so much weight. In a world full of grand monuments, mighty rivers, and towering pyramids, it is the quiet, humble act of sharing bread that remains the most enduring. The bread, though often overlooked, is the constant that ties the people to their families, to their traditions, and to each other. It is both sustenance and symbol, the very thread that holds the fabric of family life together. As the evening deepens and the last pieces of bread are eaten, the meal slowly comes to an end. The conversation quiets, and the families, full and content, begin to relax, knowing that the day has been spent well. The bread has been shared, the meal has been enjoyed, and the bonds of family have been strengthened. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. The bread will be baked once more, and the family will come together to share in its warmth, its comfort, and its simple, enduring power. In this quiet, unhurried moment, there is peace. A peace that comes from the rhythm of daily life, from the act of sharing, from the knowledge that the bread, as simple as it is, will always bring people together. The bread is more than just food. It is the thread that ties the family together, a constant reminder that, in this world, the simplest things often carry the most meaning. As the day unfurls gently across the Egyptian landscape, stretching across the fertile banks of the Nile, the steady rhythm of daily life moves forward, unhurried and predictable. The fields are tended, the bread is baked, and the meals are shared. But beneath the surface of this simple, repetitive rhythm lies an important consideration, a consideration that shapes not just the people's day-to-day existence, but their very health and well-being. The bread, the staple of life, plays a key role in this balance, providing nourishment, but also bringing challenges that must be managed, as the Egyptians know well. Bread, in its humble yet essential role, was at the heart of every meal. It provided sustenance for the workers, the farmers, and the families who lived along the banks of the Nile. Each day, the bread was consumed in abundance, soft, warm loaves torn and shared around the table. It was a diet rich in carbohydrates, an energy source that powered the day's labor. For the average Egyptian, bread was more than just food. It was life itself, the basis of daily sustenance. But as much as bread provided the fuel for hard work under the hot Egyptian sun, it also carried with it health implications. The bread that sustained the people of Egypt was often made from whole grains, wheat and barley, ground into flour and mixed with water to form the dough. This simple, nutritious food was rich in energy, but it lacked many of the vitamins and minerals that might come from a more varied diet. The Egyptians, with their reliance on bread, often consumed large amounts of carbohydrates without enough fruits, vegetables, or meats to balance their nutrition. While the bread itself provided an important source of energy, it was not without its limitations. For those working in the fields or building the Great Pyramids, bread was their primary source of fuel. It was a labor-intensive life, and bread provided the strength to continue working long hours under the sun. The bread, dense and filling, kept hunger at bay, allowing the workers to endure the grueling tasks of daily labor. However, this diet, rich in starch but lacking in other nutrients, could lead to certain health challenges over time. There is an irony in all of this, perhaps. Bread, the simple, sustaining food that nourished the people, also highlighted the limitations of their diet. While it filled the stomach, it did not provide all of the necessary nutrients to keep the body fully healthy. The Egyptians, in their reliance on bread, faced the risk of deficiencies, particularly in vitamins and minerals that are found in other food sources, like fruits, vegetables, and proteins. This imbalance would affect their health in ways that were not immediately visible, but would reveal themselves over time, especially in the form of malnutrition or weakness. In addition to the bread itself, the Egyptians did have access to other foods that supplemented their diet. Fresh vegetables grown along the banks of the Nile, such as onions, leeks, and garlic, were often consumed, adding a degree of variety and nutrition to the otherwise bread-heavy meals. The fish from the Nile, salted or fresh, also provided valuable protein, but these items were often secondary to the bread. It was bread that formed the foundation of the Egyptian diet, and though these supplemental foods were important, they were not always in the quantities needed to balance the daily intake of bread. Despite these potential nutritional shortcomings, the Egyptians developed strategies to make the most of the food available to them. The bread they ate was often enriched with ingredients like honey, dates, or even seeds, providing a touch of sweetness and added nutrients. Additionally, the inclusion of herbs and spices such as cumin and coriander helped improve both the flavor and the nutritional profile of their meals. The irony is that while the bread was a fundamental and nourishing part of daily life, it was also the cornerstone of a diet that was often one-dimensional. But in the context of the time, the Egyptians made do with what they had, and their reliance on bread was a practical response to the environment they lived in. The lack of variety in their diet did not stop them from building a flourishing civilization that lasted for thousands of years. Bread, after all, was more than just a source of nutrition. It was a cornerstone of Egyptian culture, a symbol of their ingenuity and perseverance. As the evening comes to a close and the last pieces of bread are consumed, the day's rhythm settles into a quiet lull. The bread has nourished the workers, the families, the entire society, and while it may not have provided the full range of nutrients necessary for complete health, it did what it was meant to do: sustain life, provide energy, and keep the people moving forward. Tomorrow, the bread will be baked again, the same process unfolding in the same calm, repetitive rhythm. The bread, like the day, will rise again. And in this steady, predictable cycle, there is a peace, a quiet acceptance of the food that sustains them, a food that, while simple, plays an irreplaceable role in the health and daily life of the Egyptian people. The bread, though limited in its nutritional range, remains the most important piece of their diet, keeping the cycle of work, survival, and community life alive, day after day. As the sun sets over the land of Egypt, casting a soft golden glow across the fields and quiet villages, there is a gentle hum in the air, the sound of life moving in rhythm. And at the heart of this life, as it has been for centuries, is the act of bread baking, a simple yet deeply impactful ritual that holds a profound place in Egyptian society. Bread, as much a part of daily existence as the river itself, goes beyond nourishment. It is woven into the fabric of Egyptian culture, shaping social bonds, communal life, and even the very rhythm of the seasons. Every day, the process of baking bread begins early. The ovens are stoked with fire, the flour is sifted, and the dough is carefully kneaded. But it is not just a solitary act. The act of baking bread in ancient Egypt was often communal, a shared experience where the whole family, or even the whole village, would participate. Women, with their practiced hands, kneaded the dough while children played nearby, watching as the loaves took shape. Men returning from the fields might join in, helping to stoke the fire or carry the finished loaves to the community's communal oven. In these moments, bread baking was more than a task. It was an expression of togetherness. It was a ritual that brought people together, where each step in the process felt like a part of a larger collective effort. As the dough rose and the bread baked, the entire household or community shared in the anticipation, the excitement of knowing that the bread would soon be ready. The scent of the baking bread filled the air, weaving through the homes and streets, a constant reminder of life's simplicity and the bonds that connected people to one another. The communal aspect of bread baking also extended beyond the home. In many towns and villages, communal ovens were shared by entire communities. People would bring their dough to the oven, where it would be baked in large batches. This shared responsibility not only made the task more efficient, but also created a sense of unity. The village would come together, working in tandem to bake the bread that would feed everyone. It was a shared moment of labour, where the outcome, fresh, warm bread, belonged to all. The irony, perhaps, is how something as simple as bread baking could carry such deep cultural significance. In a world where grand pyramids were built and vast empires were formed, it was the act of baking bread, in its quiet, unassuming way, that truly tied the society together. While the great monuments of Egypt stood as symbols of power and grandeur, it was the humble loaf of bread, baked daily in countless homes and ovens, that truly held the fabric of Egyptian society in place. Bread also held symbolic significance in Egyptian culture. It was not just a staple of daily life, but also a symbol of life itself. It was used in religious ceremonies, offered to the gods, and often placed on altars in temples as a tribute. The act of offering bread to the gods was a way for the people to give thanks for the harvest, to honour the land and the river that provided for them. Bread, in its simplest form, became a medium for expressing gratitude, for connecting the people to the divine. In family gatherings, bread served as the centerpiece, the focus of the meal where everyone gathered to share, to eat, and to converse. The bread was torn, shared, and eaten in a communal fashion, creating a sense of belonging. No matter how little there was, the bread was always enough to bring people together. It became a symbol of unity, of the interconnectedness of families and communities. The act of breaking bread together was as important as the meal itself, each bite a shared connection between individuals, families, and the greater society. And so, the impact of bread baking on Egyptian society is profound, not just in the physical nourishment it provides, but in the social and cultural fabric it supports. It was the foundation of daily life, the quiet thread that held families, communities, and the nation together. It was a source of energy, of connection, of ritual, and through it, the people of Egypt found a way to express their unity, their gratitude, and their enduring strength. As the day winds down and the last loaves of bread are pulled from the ovens, the community gathers once again, this time to share in the fruits of their labour. The bread, warm and golden, is passed around, torn into pieces and eaten, as stories are told, laughter shared, and the bond of community strengthened. In this simple, repetitive act, the rhythm of life continues, slow, steady, and unbroken. Tomorrow, the same ritual will unfold again. The bread will be baked, the dough kneaded, and the community will gather to share in the same simple joy. And in that rhythm, there is peace, there is continuity, there is the enduring truth that, in the end, it is the quiet, everyday acts, like baking bread, that truly shape a society, keeping it connected, nourished, and whole. As the sun begins to dip behind the distant pyramids, casting long shadows over the land, a peaceful stillness settles over ancient Egypt. The rhythms of daily life, work in the fields, the grinding of grain, the breaking of bread, continue uninterrupted. Yet, in the quiet moments, there is a deeper layer to this steady flow of life, one that connects the living to the dead, the earth to the heavens, the present to the future. It is in this space that the simple, humble loaf of bread takes on a powerful, symbolic role. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, bread was not just a staple of daily life, it was also a key element in the journey beyond life. The belief in the afterlife was deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture, and just as bread nourished the body during life, it was thought to provide for the soul in the next world. Bread, in its simple yet profound form, became an offering, a gift to the deceased, ensuring their sustenance in the realm of the gods. Every funeral, every burial ritual carried with it the same underlying truth, that bread, along with other offerings, would help the soul of the deceased journey safely through the afterlife. Just as the living depended on bread to sustain them during their time on earth, so too did the dead need bread to sustain them on their journey to the afterlife. It was not just about food, it was about ensuring that the deceased would be cared for, that they would have what they needed for the journey ahead. The symbolism of bread in funerary practices began with the preparation of the deceased's body and continued with the offering of goods to the gods and to the spirit of the departed. Bread was placed in tombs alongside other offerings, jars of food, drink, and sometimes figurines of workers to serve the deceased. The bread was thought to nourish the soul, to ensure that the journey was a smooth one, that the deceased could find their place in the afterlife with comfort and peace. The rituals surrounding these offerings were as meticulous as the bread-making process itself. The bread was often made in the same careful manner as it would have been during life, ground by hand, kneaded with care, and baked in the warmth of the oven. It was placed carefully in the tomb, just as it would be placed on the table for a family meal. The same hands that had kneaded the dough for the living would knead it for the dead, ensuring that the bread was not just sustenance, but a part of the sacred ritual. The irony, perhaps, is how something as simple as bread could take on such a profound spiritual significance. In life, bread was a humble, everyday food, consumed without much thought. Yet, in death, it became a symbol of life itself, of nourishment, of protection, and of continuity. Just as the bread had nourished the body in life, it would nourish the soul in the afterlife. It was a quiet reminder that life, though fleeting, was a cycle that continued, even after death. The belief in bread's power to sustain the dead extended beyond the tomb. In the funerary practices of the ancient Egyptians, bread was often included in the offerings presented to the gods, ensuring that the deceased had the blessings needed for their journey. The bread was seen as a connection between the living and the gods, a simple yet powerful gesture of care and respect for the departed. In a sense, the act of offering bread was an act of faith, a faith that the gods would provide for the soul of the deceased, as the bread had provided for them in life. As the rituals unfolded, the bread, now placed carefully in the tomb, took on its final role. It was no longer just bread, it was a part of the passage, a symbol of the bond between the living and the dead, between earth and heaven. The act of placing the bread in the tomb was not just a physical act, it was a spiritual one, a prayer for the soul's safe passage. The bread, humble in its form, became a symbol of eternal life, and so, as the rituals concluded, the bread remained in the tomb, part of the offerings that would sustain the deceased on their journey. The bread, which had once fed the body, now served to feed the spirit. The cycle of bread, from grain to loaf, from oven to table, from life to death, had come full circle. The same bread that had once nourished the living would now nourish the soul of the departed, ensuring their place in the afterlife. As night falls over Egypt and the rituals are completed, the people return to their homes. The bread, now an offering to the gods and the departed, remains in the tomb, part of the quiet, eternal rhythm of life and death. Tomorrow, the bread will be baked again, in homes and bakeries across the land, nourishing the living as it always has. And in the tombs, the offerings of bread continue their quiet, sacred work, ensuring that the journey of the soul is never without sustenance. In this simple, quiet act, there is a profound truth that bread, in all its forms, connects the living and the dead, the earthly and the divine. It is a symbol of continuity, of nourishment, and of the cycles of life that bind us all, even beyond death. As the light of the setting sun softly stretches across the banks of the Nile, the air carries with it the earthy, comforting scent of freshly baked bread. It is a scent that evokes centuries of tradition, a smell that has woven itself into the very essence of Egyptian life. Yet, beyond its role as a simple staple, bread has played a much deeper part in shaping the culinary habits and tastes of Egypt, an influence that, over time, has rippled through the culture, weaving itself into a broader tapestry of Egyptian cuisine. For the ancient Egyptians, bread was not simply a food item, it was the cornerstone, the very foundation of every meal. Every dish, whether simple or elaborate, revolved around the presence of bread. It served as both sustenance and accompaniment, making its way onto every table, with each loaf providing not just nourishment, but a vital cultural connection. It was the element that tied the meal together, the universal presence that gave the meal structure and meaning. But as time passed and culinary habits evolved, bread began to influence and even shape the development of other dishes in ways both subtle and profound. The influence of bread on Egyptian cuisine can be seen in the way bread was used as a base for many dishes. It wasn't just eaten as a standalone item, it became the canvas on which other ingredients were layered. Stews and vegetables, for example, were often served alongside bread, with pieces of the loaf used to scoop up the rich, flavorful sauces and tender meats. The bread, in this sense, became a tool, not only for eating, but for enhancing the experience of a meal. It was, in a way, the companion to the meal, elevating every bite with its comforting texture and familiar flavor. And yet, even as bread was used as a vessel for other dishes, it remained the focal point of the meal, the most essential part. As Egyptian culinary tastes began to evolve, bread itself also saw changes. While the staple loaves of wheat and barley remained at the heart of the Egyptian diet, there was a growing appreciation for variations in bread types. The addition of herbs, honey, and seeds into the dough not only enhanced the flavor of the bread, but also allowed it to become more diverse, complementing the changing tastes of the people. The Egyptians, always mindful of the flavors of their land, began experimenting with bread in ways that reflected their evolving culinary preferences. And so, bread began to influence the broader landscape of Egyptian cuisine, subtly shaping the flavor profiles of other foods in the process. The irony of it all, perhaps, is how something so simple, so humble in its form, could have such a profound impact on the way food was prepared and enjoyed. Bread, the most basic of foods, became a catalyst for innovation, influencing the flavors and ingredients that made up the greater Egyptian culinary tradition. It is almost as though bread itself was a subtle force, quietly pushing the boundaries of what was considered traditional in Egyptian cuisine, expanding its reach and blending with other elements of the culture in a harmonious dance of flavors. In the homes of Egypt, as families prepared their meals, bread continued to play its central role, shaped, baked, and served in a variety of forms. The bread, as simple as it was, continued to inspire creativity in the kitchen. From the adding of spices and dried fruits to the shaping of the dough into different forms, bread became an expression of culinary artistry. Its adaptability made it the perfect complement to the growing variety of Egyptian dishes, becoming as diverse as the people who ate it. Bread also found its way into the social and ceremonial aspects of Egyptian life, influencing the food served at festivals, religious ceremonies, and public gatherings. During these events, the presence of bread was constant, yet it was often prepared and presented in ways that were more elaborate, serving as a symbol of abundance and communal unity. The bread, as it had for centuries, remained a symbol of life, of survival, and of shared purpose, but it now carried with it a greater complexity, a reflection of the changing tastes and evolving culinary culture of Egypt. And yet, as these culinary innovations took place, the true beauty of bread remained unchanged. It was still the bread, in all its humble simplicity, that served as the foundation of Egyptian cuisine. The bread that had once been kneaded by hand and baked in clay ovens continued to sustain the people, but now it had become more than just a food. It had become a symbol of Egypt's ever-evolving relationship with its land, its people, and its culture. As the evening falls and the day's work winds down, the bread once again takes its place at the table. The meal is shared, the bread is torn, and the cycle of life continues. And in this quiet, unhurried rhythm, there is peace. The bread, as simple as it is, has shaped the tastes of Egypt, weaving itself into the fabric of the culture in ways both visible and subtle. Tomorrow the bread will be baked again, and with it, the cycle of Egyptian cuisine will continue, ever-changing, ever-evolving, yet always anchored in the simple, timeless tradition of bread. As the soft glow of twilight settles over the land of Egypt, casting its serene light over the village and riverbanks, there is a quiet sense of reverence for the crafts and trades that sustain the fabric of daily life. Among these professions, one stands out as both humble and essential: the bread maker. In the rhythm of everyday existence, the bakers are the quiet heroes, their craft deeply woven into the social and economic structure of ancient Egypt. And while they might not have built the grand pyramids or ruled from the palaces, the bread bakers held an important and respected place in society. Bread making was no mere household task. It was a respected profession in its own right, one that carried with it a distinct social status. The bakers, skilled in the art of transforming grain into nourishment, were seen as crucial to the community's well-being. The bread they produced fed not just the workers but the priests, the officials, and even the pharaoh. In a society where food was synonymous with life, the baker's role could not be overstated. They were the keepers of sustenance, the providers of the foundation of every meal. The bakers were organized into guilds, groups of professionals who took pride in their craft. These guilds were much like other artisan communities in Egypt, tightly knit, respectful of tradition, and bound by a shared purpose. The Bread Bakers Guild was a place of learning and mentorship, where knowledge was passed down from one generation to the next. The young apprentice would begin by learning the basic techniques: how to grind the grain, how to knead the dough, how to regulate the temperature of the oven. These skills, though seemingly simple, were refined over time, and mastery of them was something to be proud of. The guild members, much like the bread itself, grew through a process of slow, steady improvement, each baker honing their craft with patience and dedication. The irony, perhaps, is that while the bakers were integral to the flow of society, their work was often seen as quiet and unassuming, despite its profound impact. While the pharaohs and priests were revered and celebrated, it was the bread bakers who kept the community nourished. They were the unsung heroes of the daily rhythm, standing in the background, working tirelessly to ensure that each loaf, each batch of bread was perfect. Their work was simple, repetitive, but essential. It was not a job that drew attention or accolades, but one that quietly sustained the entire society. But within the guild, the bakers held a particular status. They were well-respected craftsmen, valued for their skill and expertise. Many of them worked for large estates or temples where their bread was not only fed to the workers but offered in religious ceremonies. In this way, their work took on a sacred quality, bridging the gap between the divine and the earthly. Bread was placed on altars as an offering to the gods, a gift to ensure a good harvest or to honor the deceased. The bakers, through their craft, became part of the larger spiritual and communal life of Egypt, their loaves taking on a symbolic importance that went far beyond mere sustenance. The guilds were not only a place for learning and work, they were a social institution too. The bakers would often gather after their long hours of labor, sharing stories, food, and camaraderie. In these moments, the importance of their work was understood, not just as a means of survival, but as a crucial, respected part of the social structure. Just as the bread was shared around the family table, so too was the knowledge of bread-making shared among colleagues, in a ritual of mutual respect and tradition. And yet, for all their skill and importance, the bread makers were still seen in a humble light. Their craft, though essential to life, was not viewed with the same grandeur as the work of architects, priests, or rulers. The irony remains that while the pyramids and temples were built with great fanfare, the bread that fed the workers and the pharaoh alike was baked with the quiet hum of the bakery, unnoticed by the wider world. The bread bakers, though revered within their guilds and communities, did not receive the same fame or recognition as other craftsmen or professionals. Their legacy, though profound, remains largely unnoticed in the grand stories of Egypt's history. As the sun rises over the vast and fertile lands of Egypt, a quiet hum fills the air, marking the beginning of another day. The process of bread making, deeply ingrained in Egyptian life, begins once again. But while the basic steps of kneading, baking, and sharing remain unchanged, there is a subtle beauty in the variations of bread that are crafted, each region adding its own unique touch to the dough, shaping the flavors in ways that reflect the local culture, ingredients, and practices. Bread, in its simplicity, took many forms across Egypt, from the grand cities along the banks of the Nile to the small, humble villages in the desert. The bread that was baked could vary greatly in texture, shape, and flavor. While the staple loaf was made from wheat or barley, there was an abundance of variations, each region adding its own signature style, ensuring that bread was never quite the same twice. In the northern regions, particularly in cities like Alexandria, the bread was often made from a mixture of wheat and rye, lending it a denser texture. This bread was heavier and heartier, perfect for the cold winds of the northern coast. It was baked into round, flat loaves, which could be torn into pieces and dipped into stews or used to scoop up vegetables and fish. The loaves, though simple, were rich in flavour, the rye adding a slightly earthy undertone to the bread that made it unique to the region. It was a bread that spoke of resilience, shaped by the demands of the land and the sea. To the south, in the more arid regions of Upper Egypt, the bread was made primarily from barley, as wheat was not as readily available. This bread had a lighter, fluffier texture, often baked in thick, round discs. It was not as sweet or dense as the bread of the north, but it held a more subtle, nutty flavour, brought out by the barley itself. The bakers in this region often added local herbs or seeds to the dough, such as coriander or sesame, which provided a unique burst of flavour with each bite. The bread was often served with dried fruits or fresh vegetables from the nearby Nile Valley, making it a simple yet satisfying part of the meal. The variations in bread making were not just about the ingredients, they were also about the method. Some bread was leavened, while other loaves were flat, unleavened, and baked quickly in the heat of the clay ovens. The leavened bread was made with the addition of yeast or sourdough, causing the dough to rise and create a light, airy texture. This bread was often served with meats and stews, perfect for tearing and dipping. In contrast, the flatbread was often cooked on a griddle or over an open flame, resulting in a crispier, thinner texture. It was often paired with fresh vegetables, making it a lighter option for the hotter months when people preferred something less filling. There is an irony in all of this. The bread, a humble and staple food, could be so varied, yet so universally adored. While the bread itself was always central to the meal, the flavours and methods of preparation were always subject to the land and the local resources. It was a food that was shaped not just by tradition, but by geography, climate, and availability. Each bite of bread carried with it the flavours of the region, the history of its people, and the influence of the land itself. Bread was not just a side dish, it was the centrepiece, the foundation of every meal, and it often carried the flavours of other dishes in its very structure. Sometimes the bread was flavoured with sweet additions like dates or honey, particularly in the more northern or desert regions, where the sweeter, warmer climate allowed for such fruits to flourish. These sweet breads, which might have been served at feasts or offered to the gods in religious rituals, were richer in flavour, a celebration of Egypt's agricultural bounty. And yet, despite all the variations, one thing remained constant: the bread was the unifying factor. Whether it was a simple barley loaf in the south, a heavier rye bread in the north, or a sweetened loaf dotted with dates and honey, bread was the glue that held Egyptian meals together. It wasn't just the food, it was the symbol of sustenance, of family, of community. Each loaf, no matter its flavour, was a reflection of the people who made it, a small piece of the land that nourished them. As the day draws to a close and the last loaves are pulled from the oven, the bread, rich in flavour, light or dense, flat or leavened, finds its place on the table shared among family and friends. Each bite is a small connection to the land, to the people, and to the long tradition of bread making that has spanned centuries. And in this quiet, humble act, there is peace, a peace that comes from knowing that tomorrow the bread will rise again, shaped by the land, the people, and the enduring rhythm of Egyptian life. As the last rays of the sun gently slip behind the pyramids, casting their long shadows over the land, there is a quiet reverence in the air. The pyramids, with their towering, geometrically perfect forms, stand as silent sentinels, watching over the land. They are more than just tombs. They are the culmination of generations of work, of vision, and of an enduring commitment to the divine. But while these structures are certainly monumental, they are not the only architectural feats that Egypt is known for. In fact, when compared to other great structures of the time, the pyramids represent only one aspect of a much larger architectural legacy. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt's architectural achievements, the pyramids occupy a central role, but they are far from the only expression of Egypt's ingenuity and skill. The temples, palaces, and monuments scattered across the landscape offer their own monumental statements. Much like the pyramids, these structures were built to stand the test of time, to symbolize the power of the gods, and to reflect the wealth and grandeur of Egypt's rulers. And while the pyramids are perhaps the most famous, they share a connection with these other monumental constructions, a connection that speaks to the eternal desire of the Egyptians to create lasting symbols of their culture. The pyramids, with their massive stones and precise angles, are often viewed as the epitome of ancient Egyptian architecture. These grand tombs were built to honor pharaohs, to ensure their passage into the afterlife, and to preserve their legacies. Yet, when we think about Egyptian architecture, we must also consider the temples, such as the Grand Temple of Karnak or the magnificent Temple of Luxor. These buildings, although different in function, shared many of the same architectural principles. They were also built on a monumental scale, designed to inspire awe and reverence, just like the pyramids. And just as the pyramids were constructed with incredible precision, so too were these temples. The alignment of the stones, the intricate carvings, and the detailed hieroglyphs all reflect the same meticulous attention to detail. But where the pyramids were built to house the dead and ensure the immortality of the pharaohs, the temples were places of worship, dedicated to the gods who guided and protected the living. The purpose of these structures was different, yet both the pyramids and the temples served to honor the divine and ensure the eternal continuity of Egypt's power and influence. The irony in all of this, perhaps, is how the pyramids, with their grand scale and imposing presence, are often seen as the pinnacle of Egyptian architecture. Yet, in truth, the pyramids were just one part of a broader architectural language, a language that was used to build not only tombs, but also temples, cities, and palaces. The same workers who labored to build the pyramids also helped construct the towering temples and the grand monuments that adorned the cities. The same principles of design, alignment, and craftsmanship were used in the creation of these structures, ensuring that Egypt's architectural legacy would endure. Even more than that, the pyramids themselves were not built in isolation. They were part of a larger architectural plan that included mortuary temples, causeways, and smaller pyramids for queens and nobles. These structures were designed to complement each other, to work together in creating a grand monument to the pharaoh's power and divinity. The pyramids, then, were not just isolated tombs. They were part of a larger, more complex architectural program, one that extended beyond the pharaoh's death and into the realm of the gods. And as the centuries passed, the pyramids were not the only monumental buildings that Egypt would create. The Middle Kingdom saw the rise of large rock-cut tombs, such as those found in the Valley of the Kings. And the New Kingdom introduced grand mortuary temples like that of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari. These structures, though different in form, shared the same enduring spirit that had driven the construction of the pyramids, the desire to create lasting symbols of power, divinity, and eternal life. In this sense, the pyramids were not so different from the other monumental structures of Egypt. They were part of a continuous architectural evolution, each building a reflection of the cultural, religious, and political ideals of the time. The pyramids, with their massive scale and precision, were certainly extraordinary, but they were also part of a larger tradition, a tradition of monumental architecture that spanned the ages and left an indelible mark on the world. As the sun dips below the horizon, the pyramids stand quietly in the evening light, their shadows stretching long across the desert. They are more than just tombs. They are symbols of Egypt's eternal quest for greatness, for immortality, for the divine. But they are also part of a larger architectural story, one that includes not just tombs, but temples, palaces, and cities, all built with the same dedication, skill, and vision. The pyramids may stand as Egypt's most famous monuments, but they are just one chapter in a much larger tale of architectural innovation, a tale that stretches far beyond the pharaohs and their tombs. As the first rays of dawn stretch over the Nile, the soft glow illuminates the fertile land, bringing warmth to the dry earth. It is a quiet moment, yet there is an unspoken awareness that the Egyptians' survival hinges on the delicate balance of nature, the rhythm of the river, and their ability to navigate the challenges the elements present. Each day, the bread that sustains them must be made. It is the cornerstone of their existence, but it is not something that can be taken for granted. The task is constant, influenced by the whims of the environment, whether the waters of the Nile rise too high or too low, or whether the heat of the desert sun threatens to dry out crops. The production of bread must go on. Bread, as simple as it seems, is the lifeblood of Egypt. Every morning, the bakers wake before the sun, ready to begin the familiar task of grinding, kneading, and baking. But as much as bread making is a ritual, an enduring tradition, it is also a response to the unpredictable forces of nature. In a land where the floods of the Nile can either bring life or destroy crops, where the sun's intense heat can wither even the hardiest plant, bread making is a delicate balancing act. It is not just about following the steps of an age-old recipe. It is about understanding the land and working with it, finding ways to adapt to the challenges that arise. The river, with its annual flooding, is the key to Egypt's agricultural success. The soil, rich with the nutrients carried by the Nile's waters, produces the grains that form the foundation of bread. But the river's moods are not always predictable. In some years, the waters rise too high, flooding the fields and washing away the crops. In others, the river does not rise enough, leaving the soil dry and barren. And yet, the Egyptians have learned to adapt. They have developed irrigation systems, channels, and reservoirs to manage the flow of water, ensuring that the grains they need for bread will grow despite the unpredictable nature of the river. The process is slow, deliberate, and often filled with setbacks, but the work continues. The bread must be baked, for the community depends on it. Even when the Nile's waters are just right, the intense heat of the Egyptian sun can pose its own challenge. The sun, relentless and unyielding, can dry out the crops if not carefully tended. The bakers, too, must be mindful of the temperature of the oven, ensuring that it is neither too hot nor too cool to bake the bread just right. The environment is constantly pushing against the people's efforts, and yet they continue, day after day. They knead the dough, they tend the fields, they bake the bread, all while working in sync with the elements. There is an irony in this, how the very forces that provide the bread's ingredients also make its production so challenging. The river, with its abundance of water, is both a source of life and a potential threat. The sun, which brings warmth and growth, also brings the danger of drought and scorching heat. And yet, it is in this dance with the elements that the Egyptians find their strength. They do not fight the river or the sun. They work with them, using their knowledge of the land and their tools to overcome the obstacles they present. The bread in all its simplicity becomes a symbol of this balance, of the struggle to survive in harmony with nature. In the midst of these challenges, the communal aspect of bread making remains constant. The villagers come together, sharing in the work and the reward. The bread is broken, shared, and eaten by all. It is not just a food item. It is a symbol of resilience, of unity, of a people who have learned to survive in a land where the elements constantly shift and change. Bread is the one constant in their lives, a reminder that no matter how difficult the environment may be, they will continue to knead the dough, bake the loaves, and share the meal. It is this simple act, repeated day after day, that allows them to endure. As the evening settles over the land and the last of the bread is shared, there is a quiet sense of satisfaction in knowing that the cycle of survival continues. The bread once again has been made, and the people are nourished. Tomorrow, the same rhythm will unfold once more, the grinding, the kneading, the baking. The river will flow, the sun will rise, and the challenges of the environment will continue. But so will the bread making. It is a ritual that will never cease, a steady, unbroken rhythm that sustains the people, that connects them to the land, and that reminds them of their ability to persevere through it all. In the end, there is peace in this simple truth. Bread, in all its humble glory, is the anchor in the daily dance with the elements. The Egyptians, in their quiet wisdom, have learned that survival is not about fighting nature, but about working with it. And in this slow, steady rhythm of life, there is something deeply reassuring, a reminder that even when the elements challenge them, the bread will always be baked, shared, and eaten. life in its simplest form will continue. As the morning sun rises slowly over the banks of the Nile, casting its warm light over the land, a deep and unspoken rhythm begins to unfold. The Egyptians, whose lives are intricately tied to the cycles of nature, know that today, like every day before it, there is work to be done. The seasons, ever changing yet predictable, guide the rhythm of daily life, and the harvest cycle, tied to the Egyptian calendar, dictates not only when the crops will be planted and reaped, but also when bread will be made, shared, and enjoyed. It is a connection that goes beyond the simple rhythms of baking and eating. Bread in all its forms is deeply tied to the land and the seasons. In ancient Egypt, time was measured not just by the sun and moon, but by the floodwaters of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians used a calendar that was closely connected to the annual flooding of the river, and this cycle governed the rhythm of their agricultural life. The year was divided into 3 main seasons: inundation, Akhet; emergence, Pere; and harvest, Shemu. Each season marked a crucial point in the agricultural process, and each had its own role to play in the creation of the bread that would nourish the people. During Akhet, the season of inundation, the Nile would flood the land, leaving behind a thick layer of fertile silt that would enrich the soil for the crops to come. This was the time when the bread makers could rest a little easier, knowing that the earth was being nourished for the future harvest. But it was also a time of preparation. As the water receded, the farmers would begin their work, preparing the soil and planting the seeds. While there was little to harvest in this season, the anticipation of the coming crops and the promise of future bread-making hung in the air. The Pere season, known as emergence, brought with it the growth of the crops. This was when the grain, wheat, barley, and other staples began to sprout, growing steadily beneath the warmth of the sun. The harvest was still some time away, but the land began to reveal its promise. For the bakers, this was a time of anticipation as well. The bread-making process, after all, relied heavily on the availability of fresh grain, and during Pere the bakers prepared for the coming bounty. The smell of baking bread could already be sensed in the air, even though the grain had not yet been harvested. The rhythm of the land, the steady growth of the crops, mirrored the steady, repetitive actions of the baker. The grinding, the kneading, the shaping, all leading toward the moment when the bread would rise. And then came Shemu, the harvest season. This was the time when the fields, now heavy with grain, were ready to be reaped. The hard work of the farmers paid off, and the grain was collected, stored, and prepared for milling. For the bakers, this was the most important time of the year. The fresh grain was ground into flour and the loaves began to take shape. The ovens heated up, and the familiar rhythm of bread-making filled the air. There was a sense of urgency in the air as the people of Egypt worked together to ensure that enough bread would be made to last through the coming months. In the harvest season, bread was not just food, it was a reflection of the land's bounty, a symbol of the hard work that had gone into tending the crops and the care that had gone into every loaf. The bread made during this time was fresh, rich with the flavour of the newly harvested grain, and it would feed not just the workers but the entire community. The cycle of life, planting, growing, harvesting, and baking, was complete. Bread was made not just for sustenance but for the celebration of life itself. There is an irony in this, perhaps, in how something as simple as bread could be so intricately tied to the natural world. While the seasons dictated the ebb and flow of life, the bread, made from the grain harvested at the right moment, became the constant that tied everything together. As the land flourished with new crops, so too did the bread, rising in the oven just as the crops had risen from the soil. It was a cycle that repeated year after year, always in rhythm with the land. As the seasons changed and the cycle began again, the connection between the land, the people, and the bread remained steady. Each loaf, baked with care and shared with family and community, was a symbol of survival, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bond between the Egyptians and the earth that provided for them. The bread, in all its simplicity, was the thread that held the entire cycle together. And so, as the harvest is collected, the bread is baked, and the cycle of life continues. Tomorrow, the same rhythm will unfold. Grain will be ground, dough will be kneaded. Loaves will rise, the land will flood again, the seeds will sprout, and the bread will continue to be made, just as it always has been. The seasons may change, but the bread remains, a quiet, humble constant in the dance of life and the calendar of the ancient Egyptians. As the first light of dawn slowly paints the horizon, the land of Egypt begins to stir, and with it the quiet hum of life in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. The Nile flows steadily, as it has for millennia, bringing both life and challenge to the land. And yet, amid the vast deserts and towering structures, there is one constant, the humble loaf of bread. It is the quiet but essential foundation upon which the entire society rests, especially as the pharaohs rise to power, their reigns defined not only by monumental achievements but also by their ability to feed their people. The pharaohs, after all, understood that the heart of a thriving kingdom lay not only in grand monuments, but in the daily sustenance of their citizens. And in that sustenance, bread played a central role. The rise of the pharaohs marked a new era in Egypt's history, one of centralized power and monumental ambition. But no matter how grand their plans, building pyramids, commanding armies, or expanding their rule, bread remained an essential part of their strategy. For the pharaohs, the ability to provide food for the population was the key to maintaining order and ensuring loyalty. A well-fed people were content people, and bread was the key to their contentment. In the early days of pharaonic rule, the grain harvests were strictly controlled. The land, with its annual flooding, was fertile and rich, but it was also precarious. A failed harvest or a disruption in the bread supply could lead to unrest, and the pharaohs knew that they needed to ensure a steady flow of food to their citizens. The ability to manage this cycle of growth, harvest, and bread production became a symbol of the pharaoh's power. The grain that fed the people was more than just sustenance. It was a reminder of the pharaoh's control over the land, the river, and the very cycle of life. To maintain the flow of bread, the pharaohs established grain stores and granaries throughout the kingdom, securing food supplies for the population. These stores were not just for times of famine or drought, but also for distribution to workers, soldiers, and the royal court. Workers building the pyramids or temples, soldiers marching to battle, and priests performing their sacred duties all depended on a steady supply of bread. The pharaohs, in their wisdom, understood that no matter how grand the monuments they created, no one could build or maintain them on an empty stomach. Bread, simple as it may seem, was a symbol of the pharaoh's responsibility to his people, a daily promise of survival and stability. In this way, bread became more than just food. It became a tool of political power. The distribution of bread, along with other foodstuffs, was a way for the pharaohs to assert their authority and maintain control over their people. It was not just about feeding the population. It was about maintaining a social order, ensuring that the workers were motivated, that the soldiers were strong, and that the priest could continue their divine work. Bread was the constant, a reliable and unspoken connection between the people and their rulers. The irony, perhaps, is that while the pharaohs were often revered as gods themselves, it was bread, the most basic of foods, that held the power to make or break their rule. A pharaoh who could feed his people was a good ruler. A pharaoh who failed to provide would lose the favor of the people. Bread became a symbol of prosperity and divine favor, and its absence could be a sign of divine displeasure, a warning to the ruler that the balance of life and power had been disrupted. And yet, for all its importance, the role of bread remained simple. It was not the grand monuments or the elaborate rituals that connected the people to the pharaohs, but the steady, reliable loaf of bread. Bread was baked every day, shared among families, distributed by the state, and offered to the gods. It was an essential part of the rhythm of life, one that continued unchanged day after day, even as the pharaoh's reigns came and went. As the day comes to a close and the last loaves are pulled from the ovens, the pharaoh's role in the survival of Egypt becomes clear, not just in the construction of grand temples or monuments, but in the quiet, everyday task of ensuring that the people are fed. Tomorrow, the bread will be baked again, the grain will be harvested, and the cycle will continue. The pharaohs may be long gone, their monuments fading into the sands of time, but the bread will remain as constant and enduring as the river itself. In this simple truth, there is a quiet peace. The bread, in all its humble forms, is the true foundation of Egypt. It is the connection between the pharaohs and their people, the symbol of stability and survival in a land where the forces of nature were both a gift and a challenge. The bread that nourished the builders of the pyramids, the priests in the temples, and the farmers in the fields remains a testament to the enduring power of the pharaohs and their understanding that to rule a kingdom, one must first ensure that the people are fed. As the sun rises over the massive stone blocks of the Great Pyramid, the soft golden light spreads across the landscape, illuminating the workers who have already begun their labour. The sound of tools striking stone and the rhythmic shuffle of feet on the hot desert floor fill the air. The pyramid, rising slowly but steadily against the vast Egyptian sky, is the product of years of tireless work. But behind the monumental effort of its construction, there lies a quiet but essential element: food. And at the heart of the worker's diet, like a steady, unwavering rhythm, is bread. Bread, simple in its form but profound in its significance, is the central sustenance provided to the workers building the pyramids. Each day, as the labourers gather at the construction site, they are greeted not with lavish feasts, but with a simple, humble offering: bread. It is a food that nourishes, that sustains, and that keeps the rhythm of work moving forward day after day. In a land where the harsh sun beats down relentlessly and the work is demanding, bread is not just food. It is the fuel that powers the bodies of those who toil tirelessly in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. The diet provided to the pyramid builders was carefully designed to ensure they had the energy needed to continue their work. Bread, made from barley or wheat, was the cornerstone of this diet. The grain, grown along the fertile banks of the Nile, was ground into flour and baked into simple, flat loaves. These loaves, though plain and unadorned, were packed with carbohydrates, providing a steady release of energy throughout the day. The bread was often eaten with onions, garlic, and sometimes small amounts of fish or vegetables, all of which were available in the areas surrounding the construction sites. It was a diet that was simple, nutritious, and most importantly, sustaining. The irony, perhaps, is that while the pyramid builders were constructing monuments of grandeur, their meals were humble, far from the extravagance one might imagine for such monumental efforts. There were no rich feasts, no opulent banquets. Instead, there was bread, a food that was nourishing but modest. And yet, it was this humble sustenance that enabled the workers to continue their labour, day after day. It is a quiet reminder that, while the grandeur of the pyramid speaks to the ambition of the pharaohs, it was the simplest elements, the bread, the basic nourishment, that allowed this ambition to take shape. The workers, many of whom were skilled labourers and craftsmen, relied on the bread to keep them strong and focused. The construction of the pyramids required immense physical effort, lifting heavy stones, chiselling and shaping the blocks, and moving them into place. To do this, the workers needed a steady supply of energy, and the bread provided just that. Along with the bread, they were given beer, which was another important part of their diet. Beer, made from barley, was a source of both hydration and sustenance, helping to keep the workers hydrated in the scorching heat of the desert. Together, bread and beer formed the foundation of the pyramid builders' diet, providing both the energy and hydration necessary to carry out their work. In the quieter moments, when the workers paused to rest under the shade of a temporary shelter, they would share their bread, breaking it into pieces and dipping it into their beer. This communal sharing of food was more than just a practical necessity. It was a bond, a shared experience that connected the workers to each other and to the task at hand. The bread, simple as it was, became a symbol of unity, of a shared purpose. It was the common thread that tied the workers together, the quiet, humble food that fueled not just their bodies, but their spirit. The construction of the pyramids, though grueling, was also a community effort, and bread played a central role in that effort. The pharaohs, recognizing the importance of maintaining a well-fed workforce, ensured that bread was provided to the workers in generous quantities. The work was hard, the days long, and the sun unforgiving, but the workers knew that the bread would always be there, ready to sustain them for another day of labor. The bread became more than just a meal. It was a promise, a reminder that their work was valued, and that they were part of something much larger than themselves. And so, as the day draws to a close, and the workers sit down to share their bread once again, there is a quiet sense of satisfaction. The pyramid, slowly but surely, rises higher, and with each stone placed, the workers draw closer to the completion of their monumental task. The bread, ever present, continues to sustain them, its humble presence a testament to the importance of the most basic sustenance. Tomorrow, the bread will be baked again, the workers will rise once more, and the rhythm of labor will continue. In this quiet, repetitive act of bread-making, there is a peace that comes from knowing that, no matter how monumental the task, the simplest food can carry the greatest weight. As the day fades into evening and the soft light of the setting sun bathes the land, a sense of anticipation fills the air. The grand celebrations are about to begin, the festivals and feasts that mark the high points of the Egyptian year. The people gather, their voices rising in unison, as the streets come alive with colour, music, and the rich aroma of food. Amid the vibrant festivities, one simple, essential item remains constant: bread. In these moments of joy and reverence, bread is not just a food. It is a symbol, a ritual, and a connection to the gods, the land, and the community. Bread has long held a place of central importance in Egyptian festivals and ceremonial events. It is a food that transcends the mundane, rising to the level of the sacred during these grand occasions. Whether the celebration is a religious festival, a harvest feast, or a moment of royal significance, bread is always present, woven into the fabric of the event. It is offered to the gods, shared among the people, and consumed in great quantities, symbolizing both the sustenance of life and the unity of the community. At the heart of many festivals was the offering of bread to the gods. These ceremonial loaves, often larger and more intricately decorated than those prepared for daily meals, were made with the utmost care. The bread would be shaped into symbolic forms, loaves representing the sun, the earth, and the cycle of life. These special breads were often placed on altars in temples, where priests would conduct rituals to honor the gods. The bread, in its simple, humble form, became a bridge between the earthly and the divine. The offering of bread was not just about nourishment, it was a sacred act, a way of connecting with the gods and asking for their favor in the coming seasons. The irony, perhaps, lies in how something as simple as bread, a food that nourishes the body, could take on such profound significance. While the daily bread that the Egyptians ate was essential for survival, it was in these ceremonial occasions that bread became elevated, almost transcendent. The act of sharing bread, whether with gods or with one's neighbors, became an expression of unity, of respect, and of gratitude for the abundance of the land. In a way, bread served as both the sustenance and the symbol of life, the foundation of both the physical and the spiritual. As the festivals continued, the bread flowed freely, passed from hand to hand, from the rich to the poor, from the priests to the workers. Bread was not just a ceremonial offering, it was a communal experience, a shared bond that connected everyone, regardless of their status. Whether in the grand halls of the temples or in the humble homes of the workers, the bread was the same, simple, nourishing, and plentiful. It was a reminder that, despite the differences in wealth or power, everyone depended on the same sustenance, the same basic food that connected them all to the earth, to the gods, and to each other. These feasts were not only about bread, of course. There was music, dancing, and the sharing of other foods, roasted meats, fruits, vegetables, and beer. But it was the bread that held the central place, the anchor of the meal. The bread was the first food to be offered, the first to be shared. It was broken, torn, and eaten with reverence, as though each bite carried with it a sense of history, of culture, and of divine blessing. In this quiet, repetitive act of breaking and sharing bread, there is something timeless. The rhythms of the festival, the preparation, the sharing, the eating, mirror the rhythms of daily life. Bread, in all its simplicity, becomes the vehicle for connection, for celebration, and for gratitude. It is not just a food, but a symbol of community, of life, and of the cycles that govern the world. As the night draws on and the last pieces of bread are consumed, the festivities begin to wind down. The people, now full and content, gather in small groups to talk and reflect on the day. The bread, now gone, has served its purpose. It has nourished the body, strengthened the bonds of community, and honoured the gods. And tomorrow, the same rituals will unfold once more. The bread will be baked again, the gods will be honoured, and the community will come together once more, sharing in the simple joy of bread. In this simple, repetitive act, there is a peace that comes from knowing that bread, in all its forms, holds the power to connect, to nourish, and to elevate. Whether in the quiet moments of daily life or in the grandeur of a festival, bread remains a constant, a reminder of the enduring rhythms of life, of the sacred and the mundane intertwined. And as the night settles over Egypt, the quiet hum of life continues, always anchored by the bread that rises once more day after day, feast after feast. As the first light of dawn stretches over the horizon, gently touching the surface of the Nile River, the land of Egypt stirs to life. The river, winding like a lifeline through the vast desert, is not just a geographical feature. It is the very essence of Egyptian existence. For thousands of years, this narrow band of fertile land, cradled by the arid expanse of the desert on either side, has sustained the people of Egypt, nourishing them and shaping their way of life. The geography of Egypt, with the Nile at its heart, has been instrumental in shaping its food supply, particularly its ability to produce bread, the staple that connects the people to the land. The Nile, with its predictable annual floods, is the lifeblood of Egypt's agricultural system. Each year the river rises, flooding the surrounding fields, leaving behind a thick layer of nutrient-rich silt that replenishes the soil and makes it fertile. This annual inundation, known as the Akhet season, transformed the otherwise barren desert into lush farmland. It is in this fertile soil that Egypt's grain, wheat and barley, was sown. These grains, essential for bread production, grew plentifully in the rich, water-laden fields. Without the Nile's seasonal floods, the land would have been unable to support the growth of the crops that form the backbone of the Egyptian diet. The irony, perhaps, is that while Egypt is often associated with vast deserts and dry, inhospitable landscapes, it is the very presence of the Nile, this narrow ribbon of water, that made life possible. In a world where so many civilizations struggled to feed their populations due to unpredictable climates or poor soil, Egypt thrived precisely because it had the steady, reliable floodwaters of the Nile to nourish its land. Bread, simple and essential, became the symbol of this delicate balance. It was the product of the land's fertility, the gift of the river, and the tireless work of the farmers who worked the fields. The geography of Egypt not only shaped the agricultural practices but also influenced the way bread was made and consumed. The fertile banks of the Nile allowed for the large-scale cultivation of grain, but it also meant that bread production was focused around certain regions, particularly in the north and the central parts of Egypt. These areas, where irrigation was most effective and where the soil was richest, became the breadbaskets of the kingdom. The grain harvested from these regions was not only used to feed the local population, but was also distributed throughout the country, ensuring that even in the distant temples or royal palaces, bread was available in abundance. And yet, despite the abundance that the Nile provided, the geography of Egypt also meant that the people had to be ever vigilant. The flooding of the Nile, while a source of life, was not always predictable. If the floods were too high, they could wash away the crops. If they were too low, the land would dry out and the crops would fail. The farmers, like the bakers, had to learn to work in harmony with the rhythm of the river, ensuring that the harvest would be plentiful and that the bread supply would be maintained. The bread, once made, became the symbol of their efforts, a product of the land, the river, and the people's resilience. In many ways, the geography of Egypt also shaped the way bread was shared and consumed. The long distances between cities and the isolation of certain regions meant that bread had to be transported across the land. The movement of bread, along with other foodstuffs, helped to bind the kingdom together, ensuring that no matter where a person lived, they could always rely on bread as their primary sustenance. This interconnectedness, made possible by the river and the transportation of food, created a sense of unity across Egypt. Bread, the simplest of foods, became the symbol of this unity, a food that transcended the differences between regions and communities. And so, as the sun sets over the Nile once again, there is a quiet sense of gratitude for the land, the river, and the bread that connects it all. The geography of Egypt, with its balance of desert and fertile land, shaped the food supply that allowed the people to thrive. The Nile, with its predictable rhythms, gave Egypt the ability to produce bread, the foundation of life. Tomorrow, as the farmers return to their fields and the bakers begin their work, the same cycle will continue. The bread will rise, the harvest will grow, and the delicate balance between the land and the people will carry on, unbroken and steady. As the day quietly unfurls in the soft glow of the Egyptian sun, there is a subtle hum of activity in the kitchens, where the bread-making process begins anew. The bakers, with their practiced hands, prepare for another round of kneading, shaping, and baking. Yet, before the flour touches the water, before the dough rises, there lies a collection of simple, yet essential tools, each one an integral part of the ancient Egyptian bread-baking ritual. These tools, crafted from materials both humble and practical, are the quiet instruments that help transform grain into life-sustaining bread, and in their simplicity, they tell a story of craft, tradition, and survival. The first tool in the bread-making process is the grinding stone. Made from heavy, durable materials like limestone or basalt, the grinding stone was used to crush the grain into flour. This process, though laborious, was essential to produce the fine flour needed for bread. The grain would be poured between the two stones. The top stone was manually rotated, grinding the grain into a powdery flour below. The sound of stone against stone was familiar, like the steady rhythm of daily life. The grinding process itself was slow and deliberate, the hands of the baker guiding the stone with care. It was a repetitive task, requiring patience and skill, and though it may have seemed mundane, it was a critical part of the bread-making cycle. The irony, perhaps, lies in how such a simple tool, the grinding stone, could have such a profound effect on the bread-making process. In a world where grain and flour are now often processed quickly and mechanically, the image of the baker grinding the grain by hand is a reminder of how bread production in ancient Egypt required both time and attention. It wasn't just the flour that mattered, it was the care taken to create it, ensuring that each grain was ground just right. The slow pace of this process mirrored the steady rhythm of the bread-making tradition itself. Once the flour was prepared, the next essential tool was the kneading trough, a large, shallow container, often made of wood or stone. The dough would be mixed with water and kneaded in this trough, where the baker's hands would fold, press, and stretch the dough. The trough was wide enough to allow the baker to work the dough without it spilling over, and its smooth surface made it easy to incorporate the flour with the water. Kneading, slow and rhythmic, would continue until the dough became soft, pliable, and ready to rise. The act of kneading was almost meditative, a quiet, repetitive process that required focus, patience, and skill. The dough, under the baker's touch, would slowly come to life, becoming the foundation of the bread to come. After the kneading came the shaping, and for this the bakers used a variety of tools, each designed for a specific purpose. Simple wooden boards, known as pebbles, were used to flatten and shape the dough into the desired form. These boards allowed the dough to be spread evenly, ensuring that each loaf had the same consistent thickness. Some bakers also used special molds to shape the dough into loaves with intricate patterns, adding a decorative touch to the bread. These small flourishes were not only practical but also symbolic, reflecting the importance of bread in Egyptian culture. The most important tool, of course, was the oven, where the bread would be baked. The ovens used in ancient Egypt were typically made of clay and shaped like a beehive. The baker would build a fire inside the oven, allowing it to heat up before the loaves were placed inside. The heat of the oven would rise, enveloping the dough in warmth, causing it to expand and take on its golden brown colour. The smell of baking bread would fill the air, a comforting, familiar scent that marked the end of the bread-making process. The oven was more than just a tool. It was the final step in a ritual that had begun with the grinding of grain and had continued through the shaping and kneading of dough. It was the oven that turned the simple ingredients into the nourishing bread that would sustain the people. The simplicity of these tools is what makes them so striking. In an era where technology has revolutionized the way bread is made, the ancient Egyptian tools, though rudimentary, were incredibly effective. The grinding stones, the kneading troughs, the molds, and the ovens were all designed with a deep understanding of the bread-making process. They were crafted to perform specific tasks, each tool contributing to the rhythm of the day, each tool an integral part of the larger whole. The irony, perhaps, is that in a world where so much has changed, these tools, simple and unadorned, are still a reminder of the importance of craftsmanship, patience, and tradition. The bread makers of ancient Egypt did not rely on machines or mass production. They relied on their hands, their tools, and their knowledge of the process. In the rhythmic, repetitive actions of grinding, kneading, and baking, they created something that transcended mere sustenance. Bread, made with care and attention, became a symbol of life, of unity, and of survival. And so, as the sun sets over the land once again, the tools of the trade are cleaned and set aside, ready for the next day's work. The cycle of bread-making, slow and steady, will continue, with each tool playing its part in the creation of something simple, yet profound. The grinding stone, the kneading trough, the shaping boards, and the oven all come together in a dance as old as Egypt itself. Tomorrow the bread will be baked again, and the tools will be used once more, each in its place, each in its turn. In this slow, quiet rhythm there is peace, there is continuity, there is bread. As the gentle murmur of the Nile flows across the land, a quiet sense of purpose fills the air. In every village, every bustling town, the same rhythm continues. The preparation of bread, the steady process of grinding grain, kneading dough, and baking loaves is as familiar as the sun rising over the horizon. But behind this daily cycle of bread-making lies a more intricate story. The story of how bread, in its simple and essential form, played a vital role in the economy of ancient Egypt. Bread was not just a sustenance for the people, it was an economic force, shaping trade, agriculture, and commerce within Egypt and beyond. In ancient Egypt, bread was a currency of sorts, a valuable commodity that transcended its role as food. The grain that fed the population, primarily wheat and barley, was a product of the fertile lands along the Nile, nourished by the annual floods. The harvest of this grain was essential to Egypt's survival and prosperity, and as such, it became the foundation of the country's economy. Bread, made from this grain, was at the heart of the trade and labour that sustained the kingdom. The production and distribution of bread were tightly controlled, often overseen by the state, to ensure that there was enough to feed both the people and the workers. It was the grain, processed into flour and then baked into bread, that formed the backbone of Egypt's internal economy. The management of grain was not just about feeding the population, it was a means of controlling wealth. The state had to regulate the distribution, making sure that enough bread was produced to keep the workers fed, especially in times of monumental construction like the building of the pyramids or the grand temples. This constant need for bread to sustain large-scale labour shaped the way the economy functioned. The irony, perhaps, is that while Egypt is often remembered for its grand monuments and powerful pharaohs, it was the humble grain and bread that kept the wheels of the kingdom turning. The grain was the currency that fueled the labour, the very foundation of Egypt's economic stability. The pharaohs, while commanding armies and overseeing monumental construction projects, were also tasked with ensuring that the bread supply was constant. Without bread, there would be no labour, and without labour, there would be no monuments. Bread was the quiet, essential force that held it all together. Egypt's reliance on bread, however, was not limited to its internal economy. The surplus grain and bread became important trade goods, exchanged with neighbouring regions and distant lands. Egypt's position along the Nile allowed for efficient transportation of grain, which was carried in boats up and down the river, reaching ports that linked Egypt to the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the deserts of the east and west. The trade of bread, or more accurately the grain that would be made into bread, was an integral part of Egypt's economy. Grain was exchanged for goods such as wood, silver, and precious stones, traded with civilizations like the Phoenicians, the Nubians, and the peoples of the Levant. The value of bread in Egypt's economy was also tied to the complex system of taxation. Grain, and by extension bread, was often taxed by the state. This taxation system allowed the pharaohs to accumulate wealth and resources, which were then used to fund construction projects, military campaigns, and the upkeep of the state apparatus. The people, in turn, were required to contribute a portion of their harvests, which would be stored in state-controlled granaries, ready to be distributed as needed. These granaries were not just a means of storing food, they were a symbol of the pharaoh's power, a way of controlling both the wealth and the survival of the kingdom. The relationship between bread and trade was also evident in the daily lives of the workers. While the bread-making process itself may have been simple, the movement of bread, through trade, storage, and distribution, was anything but. Bakers, merchants, and farmers worked together to ensure that bread could reach the farthest corners of Egypt and beyond, and so bread, while a humble food, became a symbol of Egypt's thriving economy, tied to the flow of grain, the work of the people, and the governance of the pharaoh. As evening settles over the land, the people return home after another day of work with bread in hand, ready to share their meal with family. The economy, quietly sustained by bread, continues its steady, reliable rhythm. The trade of grain and bread flows both within Egypt and outward, ensuring that the kingdom remains prosperous and that its people are fed. Tomorrow, the same process will unfold again. Grain will be ground into flour, dough will be kneaded, and loaves will be baked. And as it has been for thousands of years, the bread will continue to fuel not just the bodies of the people, but the economy of Egypt itself. Bread, in all its simplicity, is the foundation upon which Egypt stands, a food that transcends its humble nature to become the lifeblood of an entire civilization. The cycle continues, steady and unbroken, just as the river flows, bringing life and sustaining the people day after day, year after year. As the warm glow of the setting sun bathes the land of Egypt, a soft breeze stirs the air, bringing with it the familiar scent of the Nile. The river, once a source of life and prosperity, now flows quietly as the land surrounding it has begun to change. In the quiet ebb and flow of Egypt's long history, the rise of dynasties and the cycles of the river gave way to periods of instability and decline. And with these changes, the simple, steady rhythm of bread-making, the cornerstone of Egyptian survival, was affected. The bread that once symbolized the power, stability, and unity of Egypt began to face challenges from political, environmental, and social shifts that would leave their mark on the kingdom. For centuries, the relationship between Egypt and its bread production was a harmonious one, sustained by the reliable rhythms of the Nile's flooding. The river's annual inundation brought fertility to the land, allowing the grains essential for bread to grow in abundance. The pharaohs, as stewards of the land, ensured that the grain harvests were plentiful, and bread was the constant food that nourished the people, from the workers on monumental construction projects to the priests in the temples. Bread-making was a steady, unbroken rhythm, the foundation of both daily life and Egypt's economic prosperity. But as Egypt's political landscape shifted, so too did its ability to sustain this delicate balance. The decline of Egypt's bread production began, in part, with the political instability that plagued the later years of the ancient kingdom. As dynasties rose and fell, Egypt's leadership weakened. Internal strife, foreign invasions, and changes in ruling power disrupted the careful systems of grain distribution and agricultural management. The centralized control that had once ensured steady bread production became fragmented, leaving the people vulnerable to shortages. No longer could the pharaohs guarantee a steady supply of grain for the bakeries that dotted the land. As the political landscape crumbled, so too did the strength of the bread-making system that had once been a hallmark of Egypt's success. The irony, perhaps, lies in how bread, once so central to Egypt's identity, became a silent victim of the very forces that had allowed it to thrive. While grand temples were built and the pyramids stood tall as symbols of Egypt's greatness, the simple act of bread-making, so dependent on stable governance and agricultural systems, became increasingly difficult to maintain. The very forces that had shaped Egypt's greatness, the steady flooding of the Nile, the wisdom of the pharaohs, and the labor of the people, began to slip away, and with them, the rhythm of bread production began to falter. Environmental changes, too, began to play a role in this decline. While the Nile's flooding had once been predictable and reliable, shifting climates and erratic river patterns in the later years brought uncertainty to the land. In some years, the river did not flood as expected, leading to droughts and poor harvests. In others, the floods were too great, inundating the fields and washing away the crops. The land that had once yielded bountiful grains now struggled to maintain a steady supply of wheat and barley, essential for bread. The fluctuations in grain production began to affect the bakeries, which could no longer count on the steady flow of flour needed to make bread for the people. With the disruption in grain production came the disruption in daily life. The bread that had once been abundant began to be seen less frequently on the tables of the common people. There were reports of scarcity as grain stores dwindled and the once reliable sources of bread became less certain. The work of the baker, once a steady and revered profession, became a challenge in the face of diminishing resources. And yet, in the quietest moments, bread still remained a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the simpler rhythms that had once tied the people to the land. The irony, again, is how bread, this simple, humble food, was both the foundation of Egypt's greatness and the first casualty of its decline. The production of bread, so central to Egypt's survival, mirrored the rise and fall of its power. When the kingdom was stable, bread was plentiful. But as the political and environmental challenges grew, bread became harder to come by, and the people were left to face the consequences of a fractured kingdom. As the years passed and Egypt's political and environmental challenges intensified, the once great empire began to lose its grip on its land. Foreign invaders, most notably the Persians and later the Greeks, made their mark on Egypt, further destabilizing the economy and bread production systems. The balance of life that had once been maintained so gracefully with bread at its center slowly gave way to the disarray of a kingdom in decline. Yet, even as the kingdom faltered, bread remained. It became more than just food. It became a symbol of the past, a connection to a time when Egypt's rulers had ensured that every loaf was made with care and abundance. In the face of uncertainty, bread was still baked, albeit in smaller quantities, and shared, though less frequently. It was the quiet testament to Egypt's enduring legacy, a legacy that, despite political turmoil and environmental shifts, was still tied to the simple, steady rhythm of bread-making. As the sun sets on the changing landscape of Egypt, a sense of peace settles in. The bread, though harder to come by, continues to hold its place in the heart of the people. In the end, despite the rise and fall of dynasties, despite the shifts in the river and the land, the act of bread-making remains a quiet, enduring thread. It is a reminder that no matter how the world changes, the most basic acts of sustenance, like the baking of bread, will always hold a place in the hearts and lives of those who remember. Tomorrow, perhaps, bread will be baked again, and in that simple act Egypt's legacy will continue, slow and steady, like the ebbing of the Nile itself. As the day unfolds quietly under the soft glow of the Egyptian sun, the Nile flows gently, and the daily rhythms of life begin to emerge. There is a familiar hum in the air as workers begin their tasks, some tending to the fertile fields along the river banks, others quietly kneading dough or baking bread. While the grand monuments of ancient Egypt, those towering pyramids and majestic temples, stand as lasting symbols of a powerful empire, it is the humbler, more consistent task of bread-making that has always held sway over the rhythm of life. In the quiet moments of reflection, one cannot help but wonder how it is that bread, this simple, sustaining food, has always been prioritized over the grandeur of monumental construction. The pyramids, awe-inspiring in their scale and grandeur, have long captured the imagination of the world. These majestic structures, built to honor pharaohs and gods, stand as testament to the ambition and might of ancient Egypt. Yet beneath the towering stones, it was the steady, humble work of daily survival, like the making of bread, that kept the kingdom alive, that allowed these grand monuments to come to life in the first place. The irony, perhaps, lies in how the very bread that sustained the workers, the labourers and the builders is often overlooked in favour of the grand monuments they built. And yet, it was the steady, rhythmic task of grinding grain, kneading dough and baking loaves that ensured the survival of the kingdom, that fed the people, and that made it possible for the builders to continue their monumental work. Without bread, there would be no workers. Without workers, there would be no pyramids. Throughout history, the balance between monumental construction and everyday survival has always favoured survival. The builders of the pyramids, though skilled in their craft, were first and foremost labourers who needed to be fed, strong and sustained for their work. The building of the pyramids, while a grand and awe-inspiring task, could only proceed if the workers were nourished and able to continue. Bread, in its humble form, was the food that ensured that the work continued. It was a silent, uncelebrated hero, providing the energy that powered the labour and the labourers. The economy of ancient Egypt, with its focus on agriculture and grain production, always had to consider bread as the ultimate priority. The farmers worked tirelessly to grow the crops that would be made into bread, for it was not only the staple food for the common people, but also a crucial part of the state's system of taxation. Bread was a commodity, traded and distributed across the land, ensuring that the population had what it needed to survive. In times of great labour, like pyramid construction, it was the ability to feed the workers that became the most critical concern. Bread was the glue that held the kingdom together, the steady foundation that allowed monumental projects to progress without faltering. And yet, as grand as the pyramids were, it was clear that the pharaohs, the priests and the people all depended on the bread. The food that powered the labourers also fed the royal court, the priests in the temples, and the countless others who played their part in the life of the kingdom. The pharaohs may have commissioned the construction of the pyramids, but it was the everyday act of bread-making that sustained the kingdom and its people. The balance, it seemed, always favoured the mundane, the everyday, for while the pyramids stood as symbols of immortality, it was bread that ensured the survival of the living. In this delicate balance, the pyramids, awe-inspiring as they are, often came second to the needs of the people. When the grain harvests were good, the bread was plentiful, and the people could work, worship, and live. When the harvests were poor, bread became a precious commodity, and the focus would shift to securing food for survival. The grandeur of the pyramids, in the end, was a luxury that could only be afforded when the basic needs of the population were met. The everyday task of bread-making took precedence, not just because it was necessary for survival, but because it was the foundation upon which Egypt's greatest achievements rested. The irony, of course, is that the pyramids, those grand symbols of Egyptian ambition, were made possible by the most basic of human needs. The same bread that fed the labourers working in the hot sun to carve and place the massive stones also sustained the entire structure of the kingdom. And while the pyramids may have been the pharaoh's monument to eternal life, it was the bread that ensured the continuity of life itself. As the day winds down and the workers return to their homes, the rhythm of daily life continues, slow, steady and unbroken. The bread, once again, has been made, shared and eaten. The pyramids may rise higher, but the bread continues to be baked, feeding the people and sustaining the cycle of life. Tomorrow, the same routine will unfold again. The workers will return to the pyramids, the bakers will return to their ovens, and the bread will continue to rise, uncelebrated but essential at the heart of Egypt's survival and its monumental legacy. In the quiet act of baking bread, there is a peace, a reminder that while the pyramids may stand as monuments to Egypt's greatness, it is the humble loaf of bread that holds the kingdom together, ensuring that life goes on day after day in the shadow of the stones. As the sun sets slowly behind the great pyramids, casting long shadows across the sands, a deep sense of time lingers in the air. Egypt, with its eternal monuments, towering structures and vast deserts, holds a legacy that stretches beyond the grand temples and the pharaohs' tombs. Amidst the stone and sand there is another legacy, one of bread making, humble yet profound. It is in the quiet, uncelebrated act of baking bread that Egypt's influence on the world, both near and far, continues to resonate. The techniques, the rhythms, the methods that Egypt's bakers perfected centuries ago have left their mark on civilizations far beyond the Nile. In ancient Egypt, bread was more than just a food, it was the heart of daily life. From the grinding stones used to mill the grain to the simple ovens that bake the dough, Egyptian bread-making techniques were as deeply ingrained in the culture as the very soil that fed the grain. These techniques, developed over generations, became the foundation upon which other civilizations would build. Bread-making, though universal in its purpose, carries the fingerprints of Egypt's innovations, its tools, its processes, and its dedication to the craft. The irony, perhaps, is that while the grandeur of Egypt's pyramids may steal the spotlight, it is the quiet, everyday work of the bakers that has had a lasting impact on the world. For the techniques used by Egyptian bakers were passed down through trade and conquest, influencing the bread-making methods of neighboring regions and civilizations. From the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia to the bustling streets of Rome, the art of bread-making took root, shaped by the lessons learned from the Egyptians. One of the most enduring legacies of Egyptian bread-making is the use of leavening techniques. The Egyptians were among the first to discover the art of leavening dough, using naturally occurring yeast to make their bread rise. This discovery changed the nature of bread, giving it a lightness and texture that had not been seen before. This knowledge travelled westward, influencing the bread-making practices of the Greeks and Romans, and eventually the entire world. The idea of using a fermenting process to create airy, light bread became a cornerstone of bread production across the Mediterranean and beyond. The tools and materials developed by the Egyptians also laid the foundation for bread-making techniques in later civilizations. The grinding stones, the ovens, the kneading troughs, all of these tools were refined by Egyptian bakers and used for generations. As trade networks expanded and ideas spread, these tools made their way into other cultures, where they were adapted and improved upon. The Egyptians' understanding of the relationship between heat and dough, of the precise way bread needed to be baked, had a profound impact on how bread was made in places far from the banks of the Nile. It was in Egypt that the foundation of modern bread baking was first set. Even in the distant corners of the world, the echoes of Egypt's bread-making innovations can be heard. The ancient Greeks, who admired Egyptian culture, adopted and adapted Egyptian methods, creating their own versions of leavened bread. The Romans too inherited Egypt's knowledge, refining it further and spreading it across the empire. As empires grew, so did the methods of bread-making, each civilization building upon the techniques passed down from Egypt. The result was a bread-making tradition that spanned continents and cultures, each new iteration a quiet tribute to the Egyptian bakers who first perfected the craft. As the centuries passed and the ancient civilizations rose and fell, the legacy of Egyptian bread-making continued to endure. The bread that sustained the builders of the pyramids would go on to feed countless generations, its techniques and methods influencing the food culture of civilizations from the Mediterranean to the Middle East and beyond. Bread, simple yet profound, became more than just food. It became a symbol of continuity, of cultural exchange, and of the enduring nature of human ingenuity. Today, when we bake bread, whether in a humble kitchen or a bustling bakery, we are carrying on a tradition that has spanned millennia. The methods of kneading dough, of shaping loaves, of waiting for the dough to rise, all have their roots in the ancient Egyptian practice of bread making. While the ovens may be electric, and the grains may be different, the essence of bread making remains the same. It is a process rooted in the earth, in the rhythms of the land, and in the quiet repetition of daily life. And so, as the bread rises in the oven, there is a quiet peace in knowing that the legacy of Egypt's bakers continues, unbroken and steady. The bread, in all its humble simplicity, is a testament to the enduring influence of a civilization that understood the importance of nourishment, of tradition, and of community. The pyramids may stand as monuments to Egypt's greatness, but it is in the quiet act of bread-making that the true legacy of Egypt lives on, steady, unbroken and ever-present, like the flow of the Nile itself. As the golden rays of the sun stretch across the vast Egyptian desert, a tranquil stillness settles over the land. The Sphinx, its enigmatic gaze fixed upon the horizon, stands as a silent guardian to the ancient kingdom. Beside it, the great pyramids rise in their majesty, symbols of power and eternity, and yet, in the quiet corners of Egypt's cultural and spiritual life, there is another symbol, humble yet enduring, that carries the weight of centuries of tradition. It is bread. Simple in form, profound in meaning, and often found alongside Egypt's most iconic monuments, bread has, over millennia, become as much a symbol of Egypt as the Sphinx itself. Bread, in ancient Egypt, was more than just sustenance. It was a representation of life itself. It was nourishment, both physical and spiritual, and was intimately tied to the rhythms of the land, the river, and the seasons. The same way the Sphinx has stood as a monument to the divine and the pharaoh's power, bread became a symbol of continuity, of connection to the earth, and of the cycle of life. It was a food of the people, yet also a gift to the gods, and in its simplicity, it captured the essence of Egyptian culture. The irony, perhaps, is how something as ordinary as bread could rise to such symbolic significance. In the bustling markets, in the homes of the workers, and even in the royal palaces, bread was a constant presence, shared at every meal, offered in every ceremony, and consumed by all. Yet, it wasn't just a food. It became an emblem of Egypt's prosperity and divine favor. Just as the Sphinx watched over the land, bread became a protector of the people, a quiet companion in both their daily lives and their spiritual practices. The Egyptians depicted bread not only as a symbol of survival, but as a sacred food. In tombs and temples, images of bread were often found alongside offerings to the gods, a way of honoring the divine through the gift of sustenance. The loaves were often placed on altars represented in carvings and paintings, and sometimes shaped into symbolic forms, loaves in the shape of the sun or of the gods themselves. In these representations, bread was not just a material offering, it was a medium for connection, a way to commune with the gods and seek their favor. And in this quiet reverence, bread became an icon in its own right. Like the Sphinx, it stood as a symbol of Egypt's resilience, its relationship with the land, and its reliance on the divine. Whether it was offered to the gods or shared among families, bread was woven into the fabric of Egyptian life. In moments of joy and in times of hardship, bread was always there, a steady, unwavering presence. The irony of this, perhaps, is that while the pyramids and the Sphinx were monumental structures that embodied the grandeur of Egypt, it was bread, a simple, humble food, that connected the people to their gods, to their rulers, and to one another. Bread, as much a part of daily rituals as the grand temples or the towering pyramids, became central to the idea of life's continuity. Its symbolism in Egyptian culture went far beyond nourishment. It embodied the idea of eternal sustenance, of balance between the material world and the spiritual. Just as the Sphinx stood as a protector of Egypt's wealth and wisdom, so did bread stand as a reminder of the people's dependence on the land, the river, and the divine cycles. It was the food of the living and the dead, the daily reminder of Egypt's ongoing legacy. And in the daily act of bread-making, there is a quiet, almost hypnotic rhythm, slow, steady, and simple. The grain is ground, the dough kneaded, the loaves baked. The process is repetitive, yet sacred, as ancient as the land itself. With every loaf, the connection between the people and the land is renewed, and the bond between the living and the gods is reaffirmed. Bread becomes more than food. It becomes an expression of Egypt's deep cultural and spiritual connection to its environment, its rulers, and its divine patrons. As the evening draws to a close, the Sphinx still stands watch, its silent gaze ever fixed upon the horizon. The bread, now warm and fresh, is shared in homes and temples alike. Whether in the simplest of huts or the grandest of palaces, the bread continues to rise, just as it always has. In this quiet, enduring rhythm there is peace, a peace that comes from knowing that, in the simplest of acts, Egypt's legacy endures. The Sphinx may be the symbol of Egypt's grandeur, but in every loaf of bread, in every piece shared, there is a quieter, humbler symbol of life itself. And so, the cycle continues. Tomorrow, the bread will be baked again, the Sphinx will continue its eternal watch, and Egypt will carry on in its quiet, unbroken rhythm. Bread, like the pyramids and the Sphinx, stands as a testament to Egypt's timeless legacy, a legacy not only of grand monuments and rulers, but of the simple, steady sustenance that connects the people to the land, to the gods, and to each other, As the sun dips low over the golden sands of Egypt, casting its warm, golden hues across the land, the familiar rhythm of the day winds to a close. The sound of the Nile gently lapping against its banks mingles with the quiet bustle of daily life. In the humble homes and grand estates alike, the act of breaking bread has come to symbolize more than just nourishment. It has become the central ritual of family and community life, a steady thread weaving the fabric of Egyptian society, binding people together in both the quiet moments of the day and the grand celebrations of life. At the heart of every Egyptian family's day is bread. It is not simply a food, it is the very foundation of the family's meal, shared at every gathering, marking the start and end of each day. In the early hours, as the first light breaks over the Nile, bread is already being prepared, ready to be broken, shared, and enjoyed. It is a simple, unassuming act, kneading the dough, shaping the loaves, baking them in the warmth of the oven, but within it lies the rhythm of family life. Bread, in its simplicity, is the cornerstone of the Egyptian home, the constant that holds the family together. As the loaves rise in the oven, so too does the bond between family members. When the bread is finally ready, it is broken and passed around the table. Each piece, though small, carries the weight of tradition, a ritual that has been passed down through generations. The family gathers, sharing not just food, but conversation, laughter, and stories. Bread, in this moment, becomes the symbol of unity, of connection, of a shared life. Whether it's a family of farmers returning from the fields or a group of artisans after a long day of work, the act of breaking bread together is a moment of calm, a pause in the midst of the busy rhythm of life. The irony, perhaps, lies in how something so simple as bread could have such a profound impact on family dynamics. In a society known for its grand monuments and powerful rulers, bread remained the true symbol of what sustained the people. It was not the pharaohs or their temples that mark the most important moments in daily life, but the quiet, everyday rituals of the family. Bread was a constant, humble presence at every table, in every home. It was shared among the elders and the children, between neighbours and strangers, always bringing people together, always reminding them of their shared bonds. In larger communities, bread played an even more significant role in bringing people together. As families gathered to share their bread, so too did entire villages or towns. The communal ovens, where many families would bring their dough to bake together, became centres of social life. While the bread baked in the oven, families would talk, laugh, and share stories. This communal aspect of bread making reflected a deeper understanding of community, of shared work, shared food, and shared life. In a way, bread was the glue that held these communities together. It was in these shared moments of bread baking that people found connection, comfort, and strength. The ritual of breaking bread, though seemingly mundane, was also deeply symbolic in the Egyptian family. It was a time for the family to come together, to strengthen their bonds and to give thanks for the day's work and the food they had to share. It was during these quiet moments that children learned the value of food, of family, and of tradition. The bread, always there, always available, was a reminder of what held the family together, not just sustenance, but love, respect, and gratitude for the life they shared. And as the day comes to a close and the bread is consumed, the family settles into the quiet comfort of shared experience. The simple act of eating together, of enjoying the bread, creates a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that tomorrow the same ritual will unfold again. The bread will be baked, the family will gather, and the cycle of daily life will continue. In the end, the role of bread in Egyptian family dynamics is not one of grand gestures or lavish feasts, but of quiet, steady presence. Bread, simple and unadorned, is at the center of it all. It sustains, it connects, and it nurtures. It is a symbol of the family's shared life, of the continuity of tradition, and of the unbroken rhythm of daily existence. As the bread rises once again in the oven, so too does the bond between those who share it. In the warmth of the bread, there is peace. In the shared meal, there is unity. And in the act of breaking bread, there is life, everlasting, steady, and simple. As the sun sets slowly over the Egyptian horizon, a soft glow settles over the land, casting long shadows across the fields and the great monuments that define Egypt's legacy. Beneath the towering pyramids, the grand temples, and the imposing statues, life continues in its familiar rhythm. The smell of freshly baked bread, comforting and familiar, wafts through the air, signaling the end of another day. But as much as bread was the central sustenance for every Egyptian, there existed a subtle but distinct difference between the loaves eaten by the common people and the more luxurious varieties enjoyed by the elite. In a society that prized both simplicity and grandeur, bread was, in its own way, a symbol of social class, a food that connected the humble to the powerful, but also set them apart. For the majority of Egyptians, bread was a simple food, the foundation of every meal. It was made from the wheat and barley harvested along the fertile banks of the Nile, ground into flour mixed with water, and baked into soft, flat loaves. This was the bread that nourished the workers, the farmers, the families, unadorned, reliable, and essential. The process of making bread was simple, repetitive, and unremarkable, a daily task that formed the backbone of Egyptian life. Bread was the sustenance that fueled the body, the food that was shared at every meal, and the food that was offered to the gods. It was eaten by all, without distinction, and it formed the steady, unbroken rhythm of life. But for Egypt's elite, those who lived in grand palaces or worked in the service of the pharaoh, bread became something more. It was elevated, refined, and often served in forms that were far more elaborate than the simple loaves eaten by the common folk. The irony, perhaps, lies in how the simplest of foods, something as humble as bread, could become a symbol of status, luxury, and power. Bread, in this case, was no longer just a staple. It was a delicacy, a sign of privilege, an opportunity for the elite to indulge in the pleasures of life that others could not. The luxury bread of the elite was often made with the finest grains, carefully selected for their quality and texture. While the common people relied on barley and wheat, the wealthy had access to the best harvests, and their bread was made from the softest, most refined flour. These breads were not simply flat loaves, they were often enriched with ingredients like honey, dates, or even milk, transforming them into something sweeter and more indulgent. The bread, shaped into intricate patterns or formed into loaves of delicate texture, became a treat rather than just sustenance. In the royal palaces and temples where the elite dined on foods of grandeur, bread was often served alongside rich meats, fruits, and wine. These elaborate feasts were designed not only to nourish the body but to display wealth and power. The bread, in its delicate form, played a role in these meals, not just as a filler, but as an item of luxury. It was carefully prepared, with flour ground to a finer consistency, mixed with spices and sweeteners, and baked in ovens specially designed for the task. The elite were able to indulge in bread that was more akin to a dessert than a daily meal. In these grand settings, bread was transformed from a simple food to a symbol of abundance, refinement, and luxury. The irony, of course, is that while the elite could indulge in such lavish versions of bread, the true essence of bread, the heart of Egyptian life, remained in the simple loaves eaten by the common people. Bread, in its everyday form, was the great equalizer. It was the food that connected the workers to the pharaoh, the peasants to the priests, the humble to the powerful. The bread that the elite ate, though richer and more indulgent, was still, at its core, the same food that had nourished Egypt's people for centuries. It was the bread that sustained the empire, the bread that allowed the great monuments to rise, and the bread that was offered to the gods. The presence of luxury bread, however, created a subtle distinction in how bread was viewed in Egyptian society. While the common loaf remained a symbol of life and sustenance, the luxurious breads became symbols of indulgence, of excess, and of the divide between the haves and the have-nots. The act of eating bread for the elite became not just an act of nourishment, but an act of display, a way of flaunting wealth and power. The bread, in its most elaborate forms, was a reminder of the privileges enjoyed by the few, and a way for the elite to set themselves apart from the rest of society. And yet, in this subtle shift, there is a deep connection between the two worlds. The luxury bread of the elite may have been crafted with care and adorned with sweeteners and spices, but it was still, at its core, a reminder of the essential nature of bread. Whether it was eaten by the workers or by the pharaoh, whether it was plain or adorned with honey, bread was the food that sustained Egypt. Simple, yet profound. Bread in all its forms carried with it the rhythm of life, the pulse of the land, and the power of tradition. As the sun sets over Egypt once more, the humble loaves of bread continue to rise in the ovens of the common people, while the elite indulge in their more luxurious versions. Yet, in both cases, bread remains the same. It nourishes, it sustains, and it connects the people to the land, to each other, and to the legacy of Egypt itself. The balance between everyday bread and luxury bread may have shifted, but at its heart, bread is still the great equalizer, a reminder that, no matter the form it takes, it is the food that has always kept Egypt's heart beating. As the soft glow of the setting sun stretches across the Egyptian landscape, casting long shadows over the ancient monuments, a quiet peace settles in. The pyramids stand as eternal witnesses to Egypt's greatness, the Sphinx's gaze unblinking as it watches over the land. And in the quiet, everyday corners of life, there is a simpler, uncelebrated legacy, one that has endured across millennia and continues to influence our lives today. That legacy is bread. From the earliest days of Egypt's rise to power, bread was a symbol of life itself. It was nourishment, sustenance, and connection, connecting the people to the land, to each other, and to the divine. Bread was a constant in the rhythm of daily life, a daily ritual that bound the Egyptians together. It was made with the same care and dedication as the great monuments, a humble yet profound offering to both the gods and the people. Whether baked in the homes of the farmers, shared in the royal palaces, or offered to the gods in temples, bread was woven into every facet of Egyptian society. The irony, perhaps, is that while Egypt's great pyramids, temples, and statues often take the spotlight in the grand narratives of history, it is bread, the simplest, most essential of foods, that quietly sustained the kingdom through its peaks and valleys. Bread fueled the labourers who built the pyramids, it sustained the workers in the fields, it nourished the priests in the temples, and it brought families together in humble homes. Bread was both a reflection of Egypt's stability and a symbol of the enduring strength of its people. As we reflect on the legacy of bread in ancient Egypt, it is clear that bread shaped not only the physical lives of the people, but also their culture and their society. The methods of bread making, passed down from generation to generation, have influenced countless civilizations, from the Greeks to the Romans and beyond. The art of baking bread, the use of leavening, the tools and techniques, all of these elements found their origins in Egypt and spread to other parts of the world, shaping the way we bake and eat today. But the legacy of bread extends beyond its culinary influence. It was a tool of unity and social structure. The distribution of bread was not only a matter of feeding the people, it was a symbol of the pharaoh's power and responsibility. The steady flow of grain and bread became a currency, a means of trade, and a way to ensure the survival of the kingdom. Even in times of instability, bread remained the most reliable symbol of continuity, reminding the Egyptians of their deep connection to the land and the gods. Today, as we break bread at our own tables, we carry with us the echoes of Egypt's ancient bread-making traditions. The methods may have changed, the tools may be modernized, but the essence remains the same. Bread continues to be a symbol of sustenance, of community, and of culture. It connects us to our past, to the humble origins of human survival, and to the people who, thousands of years ago, perfected the art of bread making. There is a subtle, almost hypnotic rhythm to the act of baking bread, grinding the grain, mixing the dough, watching it rise, and finally sharing the finished loaf. It is a rhythm that has been passed down from Egypt to every corner of the world, from one generation to the next. In this simple act, we are reminded of our connection to the land, to each other, and to the enduring legacy of those who came before us. In the quiet act of breaking bread, we honor the Egyptians who, through their ingenuity and care, created something that transcended its role as food. Bread became a symbol of life itself, of the cycles of nature, of the bond between the people and the land, and of the strength of a society built on simple everyday rituals. The bread that sustained the pharaohs, the workers, the priests, and the common folk alike continues to sustain us today. It is a reminder that, in the end, it is the humble, everyday acts, the baking of bread, the sharing of meals, that truly hold the fabric of society together. As we sit down to our own meals, the legacy of Egypt lives on in the bread we eat, in the rituals we follow, and in the connections we share. The pyramids may stand as towering symbols of Egypt's grandeur, but it is the simple loaf of bread that remains, steady and unbroken, a timeless reminder of the enduring legacy of a civilization that understood the true value of life's simplest sustenance. Bread, in all its forms, continues to rise, as it always has, as it always will, connecting us to the past, to each other, and to the cycles of life that continue, steady and enduring, across time.